All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robin Paranjape, and I am the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Engineering. I want to welcome you all to the Decarbonizing Transportation Symposium that we have organized for today. I begin with acknowledging that the university is situated on treaty lands that are the traditional homeland of the Nihi Awak, the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, the Lakota, and the Métis Nation. Our time on this land is temporary, and it is our responsibility and our duty to take care of and protect the land. We hope that these lands will continue to be the home of many diverse peoples, and that they will continue to take care of and protect this land. So I have a few more things that I would like to say, but I'm really pleased that our Vice President Research, Dr. Chris Yost, was able to come to bring greetings from the university, but he does have another meeting right away after this. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and then I'll continue with a few comments.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Raman. That was great, and thank you for the land acknowledgement. I'll just reinforce or echo that this is the University of Regina is committed to truth and reconciliation, and acknowledgements like that are an important part of recognizing where we have to go in following our roles and duties in the truth and reconciliations. So, great, and thank you, Raman and Brett, for organizing this conference, and our sponsors, SAS Power. I think this is a terrific opportunity to talk about things that are ultimately important to all of us in Saskatchewan. And universities certainly have a role to play in helping in the discourse of events like this and energy transitions, and looking about how we find ways to move forward with new innovative technologies, new ideas, right? And so the University of Regina is very invested in the city of Regina as well. And so one of the things I'll highlight is we are under the way of starting up a new office, the Office of Sustainability here. And so that Office of Sustainability will definitely participate and support events like this, and work towards how we decarbonize our footprint here on campus and help the city and our surrounding areas as well. And so just a couple of things I wanted to highlight in what the University of Regina is doing in terms of looking at how we reduce one of a major greenhouse gas emitters, which is transportation, that's responsible for about a quarter of the emissions. The university has a UPass program, so we encourage our students and our faculty and our staff to use transit, right? So personal example is, so I don't have a car, I have a bike. One of the good things about living in Regina is it's flat. So I grew up in Calgary, those were hard bike rides sometimes. So, I bike, and when I can't bike, then I have a transit pass, and it's really easy to use, right? I can load that card. So we try at the university to make it as seamless and as easy as possible to encourage students to use transit. And we try to work with the city to make sure we've got good routes that are supporting our students, so that option is a good option. University, I didn't, when I first moved here, I learned about this. So the Transit Live system, which as a transit user, I rely on heavily. So when my cell phone dies, I'm like, oh, this is a problem. That was developed here, I believe, in the Faculty of Engineering as an app and a program. So again, showing a clear example of what we can do, the university can do when the university and the city of Regina work together on things that can benefit not just the university community, but the community at large. And the city can have access to our subject matter experts. So that Transit Live app, when you're using that, you can think about that great partnership between the city and the university. And then we'll mention that one of our researchers, Dr. Kelly Tang, in the Faculty of Engineering, recently received federal funding, a substantively large grant to really explore research in the area of transportation and decarbonization. And so that's federal dollars that's coming here to benefit citizens in the city, right? And so we can use that monies to help support our efforts here. And so lastly, the university is putting up, of course, electric charging stations for EV vehicles. And I was joking with, or not joking really, we were talking about it. We're like, so when is the U of R going to move all of its fleet to electronic? And you know, I don't have an answer to that, but that's where we need to start moving, right? And with the Office of Sustainability, so new capacity at the university, these are the kind of things that we need to explore and how we action on them. So with that, again, thank you, and my apologies that I do have to run away, but I know these are recorded, so I get to watch them. And I wish you all a terrific conference today. And thank you again to the organizers and the funders. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much. All right. Okay. You doing okay?
Me unfreeze, and now I'm gonna
I have a couple more things to say.
sure, I'll just get this one back there.
All right. Okay, so do I stay in the middle of the camera here? Am I there? Who knows? I am there. Good. Okay, today's symposium is the second in a series of symposia and seminars that the Faculty of Engineering is organizing with a group of dedicated volunteers, including Brett, for example. And I want to very much acknowledge the very strong support of the City of Regina, Sask Power, and Sask Energy in that organizing committee that is putting these symposia and these seminars together. In fact, I want to again also recognize Sask Power that has provided a small sponsorship funding to this series. We have their poster up, and in fact, it's because of that funding that we're able to have a little bit of a reception after today's presentations. That will happen in CK 185, which is just down the hall and over to one side towards the kinesiology building. So today's transportation or decarbonizing transportation symposia follows a very insightful presentation by Dr. Kelly Tang from the Faculty of Engineering, in which she spoke really about the issues around adopting electric vehicles by the population, and really the number of other structural issues that need to be addressed. It's not as simple as everyone just goes out and buys an EV. There's lots of structural changes that are going to be needed, and she spoke about that. Fundamentally, I believe that these symposia are really going to ask more questions or create more questions or help us to understand what the questions are that we don't have the answers to. So it's not like we're here to just pronounce on how we move forward to decarbonizing transportation. We have lots of questions. I'm sure you have questions, and hopefully we'll all work together towards the answers. And again, speaking about that reception, what we felt maybe was that, this environment is good for, one-sided communication. There will be an opportunity for questions, but nonetheless. So sort of what we hope is that in that reception, we will get to sort of one-on-one discussion with people, and maybe that will lead to, greater engagement, greater identification of what we should be doing in order to sort of address these issues. So that's kind of the hope in that. I mean, I do tell you we're doing this on a shoestring budget, so don't expect a lavish reception or anything like that. Pizza, pop, maybe some beer, but not very much. Anyway, so did I want to say anything else? Yes. Okay. So the last thing I guess I wanted to mention was that, this is the second in the series of presentations, right? The first presentation was about the built-up environment and how do we decarbonize buildings, basically. And one of the sort of important questions or issues that came up from that those presentations and that symposia was a good deal of questions about heat pumps and how to use them and how we could benefit from heat pumps and issues around that. So what we're planning to do in the fall is we'll have a workshop on heat pumps, where we'll hopefully get some experts on it and have some discussion. We'll hopefully have people that are thinking about it. You know, I changed my furnaces just last year. I didn't think about heat pumps. I hadn't realized that maybe, you know, there was some other alternatives. But so our hope is really that we'll be able to create that knowledge, that understanding, and help with those options. So similarly, we will try to have follow-on workshops from this symposia and this seminar series on transportation. And again, those activities will likely be in the fall. So I guess with that, I will just say a couple of things along with which are more to do with housekeeping. So as was mentioned, the symposium is being recorded. I'm not really going to spend a whole ton of time introducing the speakers. I'll just say one line about them. So I'll ask the speakers to kind of introduce themselves. After each presentation, and there are some team presentations, but after each presentation, we'll have a couple of minutes just for a few questions, because we want to try to keep on the schedule. And I'll also say that after the third presentation, there will be a short 10-minute break so that people can step out, you know, stretch their legs and that sort of thing. So I think with that, we will move to the first presentation, and my notes are way over there. So let me get them. So our first speaker, or a set of speakers, is Tom Thevener and Vanessa Matthews. And this is sort of a different organization, because we're largely going to have Tom speaking, and then Vanessa is really going to be like a discussant for that presentation. So bringing up issues or questions that, you know, may come up from his presentation. Tom is actually not in the room. He is in Coquitlam. He is a transportation planning manager for the city of Coquitlam, and we're bringing him in through Zoom. I guess he has spent time at the city of Calgary as with a lot of interest, I guess, in cycling and cycling policy. So as I say, I will just say a couple very short words about each speaker. Vanessa Matthews is a professor, an associate professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies here at the university, and is currently the principal investigator for a SSHRC grant on the effects of craft beer on small towns. Okay. So with that, I will hand it over to Tom and Vanessa. And all right.
Okay, can everybody see me or my presentation?
We can see.
You see the slides. Okay, that's the important part. Well, good day, everybody. So yeah, my name is Tom Thevener. I'm currently the transportation planning manager for the city of Coquitlam, but what I'm going to talk about today is how active transportation can help improve mobility while fighting climate change. And so I have got quite a few slides, but it's highly visual, and I promise to go through them quickly. So like a sort of movie on active transportation in Calgary. Before I get launched into that, just a little bit of background about myself. I used to be the bike pedestrian program manager for the city of Tucson. Tucson is about an hour north of the border with Mexico. It's definitely a desert. So I went from growing up in this environment and planning bicycle facilities and walking improvements, and actually having pretty good success around bike boulevards, which are like residential streets enhanced for bike cycling. But more important, I managed to get over the recreation hump and make cycling a legit transportation tool, and got ridership up while I was there. And so I went from one extreme to the other. But before I get there, just a slide on what I'm currently doing. So I'm at the working for Coquitlam, which is at the edge of Metro Vancouver. And we have very bold targets to go from kind of a bedroom community into something that's got a SkyTrain extension, and we want to move towards 50% sustainable mode share by transportation. We also want to reduce, become a Vision Zero community and reduce our greenhouse gases to 0 by 2050. And I'm currently working on a transportation plan update, as well as a shared micromobility pilot and other things. But I think what everybody wants to hear about is how in Calgary, when I was there from 2012 to 2019, we actually made a lot of progress on the active transportation front. I was hired to be the cycling coordinator, and then I later became the active transportation projects leader. And it was pretty exciting when I got there. And I think some of the main accomplishments that we managed to overcome, because there was a lot of hesitation, but at the same time, there was a lot of political, I think the political winds were in our favor. But I'm happy because we were able to instill a 5 E's approach to the program. So you had good engineering, good evaluation, good education and encouragement. And that really helped to solidify things. I oversaw about a dozen corridor retrofits, including a very, very large, complex downtown cycle track network. And during my tenure, I managed to double the number of people commuting by bike downtown as well as citywide. And so I'm going to give you a glimpse of what I helped to construct in Calgary, and hopefully it can inspire your community to do something similar, because I think there's a lot in common between our hometowns. So when I got hired in 2012, Council had just approved a cycling strategy. So this was on top of their transportation plan, a strategy that did a deep dive into all things cycling, with the hope of building more infrastructure and encouraging more people to cycle. It contained 50 actions to make the city bike friendly, a directive to create a city center cycle track plan, and provided funding for my position and 2 others. And basically it said, go ahead and educate, do better operations and maintenance, and plan, design, and build more bikeways. And what we started out with was actually pretty good, because Calgary already had an extensive pathway network, nearly 1,000 kilometers along the river path system, and 80 grade separated crossings. So that was the backbone of the network. But I don't know if you can see my cursor. I think you can. You know, those pathways encircled the downtown city center area, but they didn't actually connect into. And so the big project that I got to work on was the cycle track network pilot. And we planned and engaged and managed to get a whole network installed. And this took about a year of intense engagement, a lot of community opposition, a lot of community support, mixed bag. And we managed to get 3 out of the 4 corridors that we were hoping to get to create kind of an instant grid across downtown. What that ended up looking like, it was rolled out over about a month's time, but it was simple barriers to protect people cycling on 3 main downtown corridors. Sometimes we got creative and had to use the sidewalk, but for the most part, it was about 5.5 kilometers of protected bike lane and about 1 kilometer of shared space. And it was magical, because we got thousands of new cyclists out on city streets, on streets that were pretty inhospitable to people cycling. There were thousands of people using them. We had set up counters to tabulate the data, put it on a public web page, and the rest was history. This network is still in place, and it's being added to since my departure. And now new cycle tracks are going in with a lot of new development, as well as with like capital project retrofits. So you see different infrastructure types, but it still protects cyclists. That's the common denominator. Of course, it's not just bikes that, when I was working on my corridor projects, we treated them as complete streets. We have a lot of collectors that are similar to your collectors that are just like 2 lanes, parking on each side, and they really don't do much for people cycling. And they usually have traffic calming issues, speeding issues. So we'd always go in with designing for the context, look at some operational issues. What can we resolve? Look at some of the community issues that they're having out there, and then start to make not only the corridor better for bikes, but also make the environment better for pedestrians. And so here's a good example of a intersection treatment that we did to calm traffic a bit. And then here's just an example of a collector street that's pretty typical. And here's what you could do with just a little bit of paint. Here's an example of a more complex intersection with a channelized right. And here's what we did afterward. Remove the channelized right. These things are a barrier to people walking and biking. So if you can limit the number of these, it will make the environment much more friendly. Here's an example of an arterial heading out of downtown. That was 4 lanes, very challenging to cross as a pedestrian. And here's what we did afterward. Shortened that crossing and had a 2-way cycle track on the one side. Sometimes we just retrofitted the existing bike lanes and put down conflict green to call out where bicyclists may have safety interactions with motorists. And often we would work on intersections just to improve basic access, because a lot of them are just not designed with a bicyclist in mind. And in some cases, we would have barriers, fences across medians, across a known desire line. And sometimes we just had to punch through to avoid a 4-minute detour down to the next intersection. Of course, bike parking, you need it. People are riding around on bikes that maybe may cost $500 or $5,000. So you need to have good, secure bike parking, whether it's outdoor or indoor. You need a variety of both. And of course, bridges. I don't think we'd have the cycle track network without the Peace Bridge. Peace Bridge went in, $25 million, super controversial at the time, but boy, has it been successful. I've got some numbers on that later in the presentation. Improving access, we had a spot improvement program where we're retrofitting and putting in bike ramps where they were needed. And these were my big pet peeve in Calgary, maze gates. They are put in to, I think, keep bicyclists from going down sort of minor pathways into the neighborhoods, but they create all kinds of issues for people in mobility aids and people walking, people pushing strollers. So we started retrofitting these. This is actually a location right by U of C, where when I was doing my field visit, I met a lady who had broken her ankle on the ice. And no wonder, right? You can't even get a snow clearing device down this pathway because of these gates. But here's how it looks today. Winter maintenance is a big issue. Calgary's downtown has a snow removal program, which is great for people walking, rolling. The snow doesn't stick around long, and then it's scooped up and taken away. Outside the city center, it's kind of on the 24 to 48 hour plan. So it depends if it has a bike lane or not. And the road usually gets cleared when the rest of the lanes get cleared. So this is a big issue to plan for. And in Calgary, of course, we get Chinooks. So that snow can turn into ice really quick. So it's important to really maintain the bike lanes. This one on the bottom right, not so well. This was a problem even when I left there. And of course, education, you can't change a culture, get more people cycling, and overcome some of the hesitation without pounding the pavement. We had a team of 6 summer ambassadors when we rolled out the cycle track network, and they had thousands of interactions with the public, handing out information and just answering basic questions. It really did a lot to change the culture. And you got to have pamphlets, brochures, posters, bus stop ads. We did it all. And then on the encouragement front, my one education encouragement planner made quite a bit of headway, just working with the communities to overcome some of those who bikes in winter type barriers with this handy dandy kind of postcard poster series that said, hey, like everybody's kind of doing it. What's your excuse? and then having sessions to answer some of the, well, how do you bike in winter? So it all can be overcome. And also related to encouragement, we did June is Bike to Month, and had a bunch of side events going on in and around the same time to kind of create that culture of cycling. The thing I invested a lot of time with was, because there's a lot of skeptics in Calgary, was evaluation. I set up, I'd call it the most robust bike count program in North America. If you go to calgary.ca/bike data, you'll see what I mean. I've got a whole motherload of data that was collected, and it was all to help overcome some of the public hesitation. Oh, why would you put a bike facility here? There's nobody biking. I got that excuse quite a bit. So we put the numbers up on the web for everybody to see, and it helped answer a lot of those questions. And for example, this is one of the first bike lanes that went into Calgary. We saw ridership basically triple after a couple of years. So this was just a sign of some of the pent up demand that was out there. And if you put the facility in the right place, you can see instant results, even if it's just a painted bike lane. And we made sure to get good communication material out after each project so that the public understood the benefits. And it's also about bylaws, intersections. That's where 70% of the issues happen, 70% of the collisions. We passed a multi-use crossing bylaw to give bicyclists the same rights at intersections when the elephant's feet pavement markings are in place. Also passed a safe passing bylaw, one of the first municipalities in Canada to do so. And we worked with the province quite a bit. We requested that we wanted to make changes to the speed limits, create more traffic bylaws. They seem to work pretty good with us. The other good thing that we got to do is create a provincial bike design guide. And so this didn't quite get finished. It's 99% done. Unfortunately, with the change of government a few years ago, it never got finished, but I'm hopeful that someday they'll pick it up and get it approved so that communities across Alberta can use it. But it's very similar to the one that we have in British Columbia, which is approved. A good resource if you're getting into bikeway design. We also worked with the province to kind of legalize e-scooters as well as e-bikes. So it was all good for a while. We got a lot of progress, and we did manage to get an electric scooter pilot underway. And when I left, we had gotten the e-bikes from Lime out on the streets, saw immediate success, even though they launched going into winter. 170,000 trips in the first year, definitely improved mobility, gave people a new transportation mode, very popular in the city center area. And then at the same time, we were working with the province to legalize scooters. And the next year, e-scooters did take off, and we had about 1,500 scooters out on the streets, mostly focused in the city center area, and saw really huge ridership. So much so that the operators said Calgary was their busiest market in North America. So pretty happy about that because they're still alive and well. They have a similar amount of vehicles out on the streets today, and they've expanded up into the University of Calgary area. And then this is just some of the data from what we learned. 50% of all scooter trips began or ended along a main street. Don't forget about main streets when you're designing them. Calgary's main streets are still pretty car-centric, but people were still going there regardless. So I'll get to my takeaways and then leave you with a few words of inspiration. If you build it, they will come. Calgary proved that if you build some infrastructure, people will come out in throngs. There's pent-up demand. People are just afraid to use your infrastructure today. We proved that by building the cycle track network and additional corridors outside of city center. The Peace Bridge, as I mentioned, had one of those automated counters. It went in over a decade ago, and in year 1 or 2 after the bridge was installed, we put in the automated counter. Over 14 million people walking and biking have crossed this bridge since then. It gets phenomenal use, even in the dead of winter. It's getting a few thousand people per day crossing it. And if you look over time on this civic census map, the percentage of people biking to work has gone up astronomically where we have put in the infrastructure. So if you track where these darker blue boxes are in the higher mode share, we have done improvements in and around U of C to see this bump. We've seen the bump in the city center area, and just outside in the inner cities where we put a few projects, we are seeing the results of that. Another takeaway is to make sure you build it right. Separate people by how fast they are going. There is a distinct speed on sidewalks in the pedestrian zone. People are either stopped milling about, or they're walking 3 to 5 kilometers an hour, or maybe they're going at a slight jog closer to 10. And you got people driving. Yeah, they're going to go 30 to 60 depending on the speed limit and the design of the road. But then the micromobility zone, people on a bike could go 13 kilometers, 15 kilometers an hour. On an e-bike, they could be going 30 kilometers an hour, depending on the grade, designed for them separate from the pedestrians and people driving. E-mobility has great potential, but be careful what you wish for. The size and weight of the electric vehicles being sold in North America pose a great safety risk to people walking and biking. They weigh about 30% more than the standard vehicle, its brother, and that causes very serious safety issues at intersections and on the road. So we need to separate more than ever. We also need to do what we can to encourage smaller vehicles, smaller electric vehicles, whether they're micromobility or they're microcars. There's a whole industry in Europe of microcars, and that's something that can have a smaller footprint environmentally, but also help improve safety and make the vehicles more affordable. In a recent survey that we did in Coquitlam, we found out that 6 in 10 of our residents cannot afford an electric vehicle. They're just priced out. And they're still dependent on fossil fuels, depending on where your electricity comes from. So change is hard, but here's my advice for what's needed. It's going to take vision and staff. Cities that invest in dedicated specialized staff on active transportation are much likely or more likely to have a higher mode share. This is numbers from the League of American Bicyclists in the US. It's going to take political will and strong leaders. Actually, I think this slide should say it takes funding. And if you only spend a few $100,000 a year on your cycling, you're never going to get anywhere. One corridor alone in Vancouver that had Silva cells to capture the rainwater, that had traffic calming, a cycle track, pedestrian amenities cost $13 million. So, the province of British Columbia only spends about $20 million a year on infrastructure for active transportation. The advocates are asking it to go up to 100 million, but it really needs to go up even beyond that. So if you haven't started talking in your province about getting more funding for active transportation, I encourage you to do so. And then about those political leaders, any city that is seeing progress around the world, such as, there's a picture of Paris, where they're seeing really good results. It's because of the determination of the elected officials and of the city leaders. You got to get them on board. So thank you for tuning in. I'll turn it back over to Brett and company.
Well, thanks, Tom. Great to have that presentation. And we're going to get Professor Vanessa Matthews up here to offer a response. And maybe if you could stop sharing, we'll have Vanessa on the screen here. There's a mic for you, Vanessa. And if you want to stand where that camera is, I want to make sure that this is the main. Oh, maybe that works, actually. You can see each other.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, perfect. Besides studying craft beer, I also am very interested in active transportation and urban planning, and do a lot of discussions around parking these days as well. It's really wonderful and inspiring to see the before and after pictures that Tom has shared and to learn more about the success that is coming from Calgary of integrating active transportation corridors. So I wanted to comment today on some of the main takeaways for me from this presentation and bridge those into a discussion about the local context here. So I'll kind of focus on design, behavior, and implementation, just pulling out some of those main strands. It's very clear from the Calgary case that design and redesign is a critical component that needs to be addressed in order to actually establish shared streets. Regina, not unlike other cities, was very much designed around the car. Streets and parking largely define movement and often define a large part of council discussions as well. We have a fairly low uptake, I find, of active transportation in the city. In 2021, which is the most recent StatsCan data, 0.5% rode their bikes to work, 3.6% walked, 3.6% took public transit. When we account for all of the different modes of alternative forms of movement, we end up with a 90% dependency right now on vehicle use. So we really have to shift that. The number of people using active transportation in Regina actually declined between 2016 and 2021. So we really need to shift that investment and think about new ways of doing this. We can look at that data and we can say, not a lot of people are making that choice to actually choose those alternative forms of movement, or we can look at that data and we can say, this is how many people are currently making that choice, but it doesn't reflect how many people would make that choice. If we created safer and more complete bike networks, if we created more reliability around public transit, and if we created greater walkability through mixed use zoning and through greater densification. So there's a behavioral shift that needs to take place, right? There's a design shift that needs to take place and there's a behavioral shift that needs to take place. I think if we learn from Calgary and we learn from what Tom has so beautifully presented here, that shift won't happen until those corridors are established, right? We need to create the corridors, we need to invest in that in order to get that shift to actually take place. We've had a number of fatalities between motor vehicles and pedestrians, motor vehicles and cyclists in the city. And I think that speaks to the quality of design and also the need to have that investment happening quite quickly. That is certainly not creating a lot of trust in what currently exists. We're still painting a lot of lines on streets and we're letting the paint kind of wear off. We're still creating bollards that are easily kind of blasted through by vehicles, and we're seeing news reports of that as well. So I think we need to do better at actually creating sustainable, protected movements throughout the city, especially in places that people are commuting. We have a lot of really strong policy and planning documents in place, and I'm inspired to see that when we have strong leadership, we can make these things happen. We have our renewable city framework, which is really strong. Active transportation is listed as one of our big moves. We have our transportation plan, our master plan, our transit master plan. Both of these are excellent things. They create all these aspirations. Where we're lacking and what we need to learn from Calgary is how to actually implement these aspects. We need to have the investment behind us to be able to create these initiatives. The last I saw of the bike network, we have a plan to complete it in 20 years, which will be a very long period of time to actually do that. We are not even spending most years $1 million on actually investing in this bike network. We need this to kind of come at once, that you create this system just like Calgary did all at once. You create that investment and then people will actually support that progress. We are definitely still we've spent over 70 million on widening Arcola. So we are very much strong on the street part of it. And I think we need to kind of shift that focus and recognize that shifting it means that in the long run, we'll have to pay less for the roads as well. Okay, so some takeaway kind of questions maybe is, learning from Calgary, how do we keep the momentum going after pilot projects? And I don't know if Tom, you want to kind of think about that. How do we keep it going with changes in leadership as well, where priorities might actually shift? I was thinking about the behavioral shift that needs to happen, not only for people who are biking, but also for people who are driving, because it means giving up the parking. It means thinking differently about how we move from vehicle to our destination as well, so that we're kind of sharing those streets and not just bringing active transportation into a car designed infrastructure. We need to kind of rethink that infrastructure entirely. I know EVs are going to come up a lot today, but EVs are still kind of using that street as a car street. They're still kind of focused on parking. They're still kind of using that continued sprawl that we have and not forcing us to think differently. So that's a very kind of condensed set of responses for what I thought was a really inspired presentation by Tom. So maybe I will leave it at that so that I'll leave time for audience members as well.
We have any?
Two of you talk about the Calgary and active transportation and how we use the experience gained in Calgary to apply to Regina. But Calgary is not Regina. Calgary is 1.2 million people. Regina is more like Oakville, maybe 200,000 people. So how would you compare the two? How would you apply one to the other? My second question is, do you consider e-scooters as part of active transportation, and what is your take of it?
Maybe can I, and I'll speak really briefly to the first question. I hear that a lot that comes up of we're not Toronto, we're not this place. I think that we need a made for Regina kind of way of thinking about this, but cities that are much smaller than ours have really great public transit, have really fantastic active transportation. So I don't think that size should in any way kind of deter us from making those investments. We need to think differently about how we're growing as a city, because when you grow in more dense ways, we allow for that public transit use to come up more. We allow for easier access between home and work and places that we're going to. We need to kind of let go of the single family zone as being the most protected space so that we have more of a mix of things. So I don't see the size of it at all kind of obstructing what's possible here. But I'll turn it over to Tom. You have the experience from all of these aspects.
I know, and I've worked in all kinds of communities, wet, hot, dry, cold. It's 95% the same in every community, big and small. It's the built environment, it's your land use, and it's what your priorities are on the streets. You know, those things determine what you'll get at the end of the day. It's going to take time to change that culture. But you need persistence, and you need to do it because climate change is real and people's health is at risk. You know, you're going to have freakishly hot days in summer that you're going to say, hey, let's make sure we got that shady street or transportation options, benches for people to sit down on. You need to plan for that. Active transportation is a great way to bridge that gap, to provide the people the ability. It's actually really cool riding a bike in hot weather. It's only when you stop that you start sweating. I learned that in Arizona. You want to take it easy, go slow when you're riding because you don't want to overexert yourself, but you get that natural breeze and it helps cool the body down even on a hot day. And in the winter, obviously, you know, actually I didn't present this stat, but we actually, we have more people biking in winter downtown than we had in the summer before the infrastructure was built. So it just goes to show, like, if you build it, people really will come, and winter is not a barrier. You can get a fat bike with those massive tires. It could go over any ice and snow obstacle. So it's just about your gear at the end of the day. And most people are willing to invest a bit of money to make that happen. And with your transportation plan, I noticed it's 5 years old and up for a renew. Like, this is your chance to get it right and to get a bold vision that looks at mobility in a new way. I just hope that you have some willing people that are willing to say, to fight for it, because it is going to involve trade-offs. It's one thing to plan a network. It's another to go and retrofit a corridor. But you have to keep your foot down. You have to know what the benefits are of the projects. Go in with a safe systems approach, that you're going to retrofit these streets, make them safer for everybody, because that's what these type of improvements will do. It's about complete streets. It's not about taking parking away. It's not about slowing down cars. I mean, it is about those things, but those are actually such a positive thing. You just have to look at it in a new light. And then I think to answer your question about electric scooters, we do see that they are on the spectrum of active transportation. They're obviously less than like a kid's kick scooter, but they're obviously more active than, say, like a powered moped or one of those seated scooters like you see in Asia. Like those are also technically micromobility, but those ones are not active. On the electric kick scooters, you still have to have some movement balance. So it is sort of active transportation, but it's certainly sustainable transportation.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking we'll stop now because we are late already. So join me in thanking Vanessa and Tom.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Okay. So our next presentation is again a team presentation. It's basically, well, it was supposed to be Greg Kuntz and Nathan London, but I believe that Greg could not attend. And so Robbie Humble from actually our committee, the group that is actually organizing this presentation, is going to be stepping in. She is also an employee of the city. Nathan is the manager of transit at the city of Regina, Saskatchewan, born and bred. I think with that we'll hand it off.
Should I say something there? Did you hear that? I can hear myself on the computer.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, we unmuted. Yep.
Okay, can folks hear? Okay, great. So my name is Robbie Humble, and I am a sustainability and adaptation consultant with the City of Regina. As Ramon said, Greg can't be here today, but basically Nathan and I are going to talk a little bit about what the City of Regina is doing. And basically I'm just going to give a kind of an overview of, or a bit of a refresher around the energy and sustainability framework. As Vanessa and Tom said, looking at the role of active transportation in this is so important, but we can really zoom out back to some of the ground setting policies that are really driving this work right now. So the Energy and Sustainability Framework is a community plan to achieve our goal of becoming a renewable net zero community by 2050. And that target was unanimously set by Council in 2018. With the framework being approved in 2022. So it is a climate mitigation plan that accounts for our community's fair share of global emissions to help slow climate change to 1.5 degrees warming. And this is why, right? So we see the blue line at the top showing what we call a business as planned scenario. So the line charts are projected community emissions without a coordinated plan, right? So looking at all of the plans that were in place when the framework was developed, where would that get us? And so it was clear that we needed more of a coordinated, targeted effort in order to shift that. So basically the green line at the bottom showing what our community's emissions could be in a low carbon future, and the Energy and Sustainability Framework is really the plan to get us there in a way that brings the most benefits to the community and brings everyone along as much as we can. So to reach the target, the plan identifies 7 big moves and 31 associated actions. So all of them follow the key principles of reduce, improve, switch. And we've talked about that before in previous symposiums, but it's really important, I think, to emphasize that because it really means focusing on drastically reducing our energy use and increasing energy efficiency across the whole community before and while we switch to renewable energy. And all of these pieces have to work together at the same time. And especially in these early days, as we need to put a lot of focus on these actions. And of course, the big moves require action from everyone in the community. No one entity can do this alone. And that's why events and initiatives like this are such an important part of, looking at how we can work together in order to move these key actions forward. So when we look at the big moves and how they work together, we can see obviously that the framework is way more than a climate mitigation plan, right? It is a big piece of how we get our emissions down, but it's really a transformational roadmap to create a more resilient, healthy, wealthy community for the long term by putting all of these pieces together. So the first symposium, as Ramon mentioned, talked about buildings. So that covered, looked at a little bit at big move number 1 was around retrofits, but also number 2 and number 3 around switching to clean heating sources, as well as moving to net zero new construction. And then today, obviously, we're focusing a little bit more on big moves 5 and 6 in the framework plan, which looks at low emissions vehicles and increasing active transportation and transit use. So one of the ways that the city is currently advancing work on Big Move 5 is through electrification of the city-owned fleet, including buses, which also have the added benefits of reducing noise and air pollution, both for operators and residents, pedestrians. And obviously other presenters here are going to be talking about low emissions vehicles. And so we're really eager to hear from those folks around what we can be doing in this area. And I think Dr. Yost was talking about this earlier. The university is looking at installing chargers for student transportation and is looking at their fleet. How can they move that forward? And the city right now is really focusing on having a large fleet. How can we move that forward? Looking at continuation of service, and then also trying to look to how can we work with the community to implement this more community-wide. And then, of course, Big Move 6 is really looking to shift how we move in our community. So increasing our ability to get where we need by public transit, walking, cycling, or rolling. And it's clear from the presentation before that although this is important for reducing emissions, it's also even more important for building a more inclusive and car-reliant community. And so even though some of the actions in this big move in the overall framework don't result in the biggest chunk of emissions, they're really critical if we're going to be able to achieve the transformational potential of what these plans can do, because they really provide more co-benefits, right, for a community health and well-being perspective than can be achieved only through the electrification of personal vehicles if we only went that route. And so they're essential building blocks of building an equitable and inclusive community where everyone can safely and conveniently get where they need to be. So basically, the purpose of our presentation here today, so Nathan Looning will join me right away to talk about transit actions and how this is being advanced through the new transportation master plan. And so really the transportation master plan is elevating the role of transit in Regina. It's setting that foundation to say, how are we going to move, this massive priority forward and looking towards meeting a 25% mode share by 2025. So I will hand that over to Nathan. Oh, I got it. There we go.
All right. You still hear me? Testing?
I didn't break it.
Good. Sounds good. Thank you. I'm Nathan Looning. I'm the manager of Transit Administration. And I was the project lead for the Regina Transit Master Plan. I'm going to go over this as a high level, but you can view the entire plan on regina.ca for more details and the actions that are in there. So what is the Transit Master Plan? So it's a 25-year plan laid out to transform how we get around Regina using mass transportation. We did hire a consultant to help us out, Dillon Consulting, and it identifies the needs of our system for our city, and identifies, what did the community say and what did they want out of a system for Regina. And it planned for the future, taking into account all the plans that the city does have, and it aligns well with the energy sustainability framework and our transportation master plan. So the project that we did does reimagine how transit is seen in the community, and this is a 25-year plan. It elevates the role of transit within Regina. When we outset of this project, we didn't plan to have this happen over COVID. We wanted to do a lot of community consultation and just kind of happened to go that way. We didn't want that to be a barrier, and we proceeded with the project regardless. And so we had to do a lot of consultation through Zoom meetings, meeting with our community stakeholders, doing a lot of online surveys. And we're able to get over 2,200 interactions with residents that way. It was innovative because our consultant too did use a lot of crowdsourcing travel data to help understand the travel demand in the city and then reimagine what the transit system could look like around that travel data. So as part of the project, our consultant looked at how Regina Transit compares to other, peer systems. Overall, our system did perform well in terms of ridership levels. We had a nice modern garage, modern fleet. So we have a lot going for us, but we did have 10%, lower cost of our service. We had less funding contributions, and we had lower service hours overall. So not as much service as other cities. And some of the growing pains that came into place there that we had seen very few service hour increases. The population was still growing, so we weren't keeping up with that growth. And we were seeing a lot of new industrial and business growth, and transit was very stagnant in that growth with the city. So some of the issues that we heard from the community were around frequency and routing. How often does a bus come by? Where does it go? The hours of operation. How do they actually load and pay to use the bus? Having that flexibility rather than having to rely on a fixed schedule. Interesting, we heard a lot on snow and ice, on how to get to the bus stops and how much snow and ice is accumulated on the sidewalks to get there, and the access to bus stops and safety as well. So some of the solutions that came out of that was to obviously expand the hours of service that we provide more routing, direct routing to those key destinations, improve and use technology as it is involved, and look at accessibility and safety improvements that we can do on our system. Looking at cost improvements for people to take the bus and the enhanced payment options there. And obviously too, looking at alternative energy and establishing hubs within the city. The service was broken down into kind of 5 distinct types. I'm going to go over them very briefly, but it concentrated on the main routes, and those are known as our express routes today. They operate on the main corridors like Albert Street, Arcola, Victoria Avenue, and those would be the backbone of the system going forward. And then local routes would fill in the gaps in the communities, and this is a high-level map. I don't expect to go into this into too much detail, but this just shows the main routes, the local routes, and then our on-demand areas and how that would all work together. And on-demand services is evolving technology within the transit world. This is something, if you were around in the 70s or 80s in Regina, you may remember the telebus. This is just a modernization of the telebus where we're using technology, either an app or someone would call in to book a bus to pick them up. This service is used in, kind of developing areas, low ridership areas. And yeah, it's basically trying to, almost like a car share program where you're picking people up on the bus. It takes passengers from bus stop to bus stop within a service area, or takes them to a hub where they can get on another bus to go across the city. And it works with our paratransit service as well. And our paratransit service, if you're not familiar with it, does pick people up that have lower mobility or are not able to use conventional service. And that picks people up at their door. And some of the recommendations from that was to expand some of the training that we give our our paratransit customers who could take our conventional transit services to move them from paratransit to conventional. Our paratransit service is very well used. It's sometimes hard to get a trip at certain times of the day. So we want to try to expand the capacity by allowing people to learn about the conventional transit system and integrating our system together. So right now we're kind of separate where we have a conventional system and a paratransit system. But at times, paratransit customers could potentially use both modes of transportation, and we're working towards that. So the big recommendation from the master plan was to increase the amount of service hours in the short term. So we're at 280,000 hours annually that we provide to the city right now, and it wants to expand that by 60% to 445,000 hours over the next little bit. So that would mean more service coverage, more frequency of the routes, and shorter journey times. Long term, we want to look at implementing a BRT network. So that would implement our main routes that operate on those main corridors into a bus rapid transit system. And this would require priority signals at key corridors, upgrades to those corridors as well, and improved frequency. We want to look at partnerships with other municipalities around the city. As they grow and as we grow, there is more vehicle traffic coming into the city, and we want to see how we can come together and maybe solve some of those traffic issues that we see maybe at those peak times. And want to make sure that we are aligning our routes with any improvements to pedestrian and cycling network. The big thing out of this is our consultant did a deep dive into our fleet and what kind of renewable fuels can we look at. So they looked at natural gas, hydrogen, and electric, and the work that was being done with the energy and sustainability framework and the work that's being done here ultimately led us to being an electric fleet. So we are purchasing our first buses here in 2024. They should be arrived in 2025. And this is going to be basically our plan going forward, so we can have 100% renewable fleet by 2039. So as the diesel buses run out of their useful life, they will be replaced with electric buses going forward. And you may have heard recently that we did have a federal grant to help us purchase our first 27 electric buses and get that rolling with the infrastructure that we need. So yeah, it's been exciting in getting that going. Other recommendations is to establish transit hubs. That's our locations where where multiple routes come together and people can wait for those buses. Install digital displays, taking audits of our paths and our pedestrian pathways, and look at how we prioritize plowing for transit bus routes. Our fare system, it was talked about earlier here at the start, where we have an R card. It's been around for probably over 10 years. It's been a good system, but it does need an upgrade. Technology has improved quite a bit. And we want to look at, how can people pay rather than just having a reloadable card? So opening it up so they could use debit, credit card, Apple Pay, and app, still use cash as well. And if they do have a card, they don't have to go somewhere to physically load it. They can just load it online. So that's a project that we'll be working on. And we want to look at, again, exploring, possible connections with municipalities and looking at an integrated app that has planning and our on-demand and fare purchase all in one. And our last one here is to remove fares for children 13 years and under. We did that this fall, and it's gone well. We've had 50,000 more rides of kids getting and using the bus, but it's been more so efficient for families who have a lot of kids. It was kind of economically a disadvantage for them to get on the bus. If they had 4 kids, they had to pay for each one. This helps families get around Regina. So what does this need? Like, everything I've talked about is great, and it's gonna help improve our system, increase ridership. But, and I don't want to feel like a broken record from my other presenters, but the biggest barrier for us is that the funding. So we have a lot of funding needs, and there are a lot of competing priorities with the city. So operational funding to increase the number of service hours that we have on the road is our priority, but there isn't a lot of sources for that. Capital funding has seemed to be a little more easier to get. So we are getting funding for our electric fleet. Various capital projects that we have through the federal government have been funded this way. But ongoing operational funding is something that we'll need to make our system better, to have those service hours, improve frequency, and have more coverage in the city. So overall, that was a very quick run through of the plan. But like I said, if you do have specific questions, you can obviously ask me, but we do have the full plan on our website at regina.ca.
All right, thank you. You talked about operation funding. Let me ask you a fundamental basic question. What is the present fare box revenue as against your operating costs? Do you have a legislation, and what is existing, what's planned for the future? And do you have some kind of legislative upper limit? In Calgary, for example, can't go beyond 45%, or otherwise you have got to increase the level of service.
Yeah. So currently we operated in that 35 to 40% cost recovery. During COVID, obviously that dipped lower. We do not have a legislated amount or target that we need to meet. So if we go to 55%, it's not something where we need to adjust fares, or if we go down to 20%, that we need to make up those extra funds. But overall, typically in transit systems, they're not a money-making business. You'll be hard pressed to find something that does fully fund the cost of the service overall, unless you get into those very large systems. So typically, yeah, we've been in that 35 to 40% cost recovery range.
Consideration given to biodiesel products, and especially given the new partnership between FCL and AGT Foods in Regina and their renewable diesel facility?
There has been, and that was part of the discussions when we did the actual plan. Ultimately, based on the vision of council to be a net zero community, and to look for the potential net zero grants that are coming from the federal government, the decision was made to go to electric.
As part of the plan, is there been any consideration to convert the RPs to free flow corridors to try and reduce idling time for cars at every intersection, as well as is there any plan to create some sort of rapid transit system on these corridors?
Yeah, so in our plan, our main routes that were identified in the plan are going to be the basis of our BRT or bus rapid transit in the future. So these corridors include Albert Street, Victoria Avenue, Arcola, and in the north west as well. So that's going to take some time. We do need to increase our frequencies first to make sure that we and get the infrastructure installed, so we can have, free flowing buses having their dedicated space to go down those corridors, and make sure that, we have service that's coming every 5 minutes as opposed to every 30 minutes, which it may be today. Yeah.
Yes. You talked about procuring some renewable fleets for transit in 2024 or 2025. Are you concerned about supply chain issues with this procurement?
Definitely. So we're in the process now of going out to market to look for electric buses, but we've heard in talking to other municipalities that, the actual build time may exceed 1 year. So that's why we're planning out for 2025. Right now, the bus companies in Canada, they are assuring us that they can meet the demand, but there is a lot of pent up demand. So and because this is an emerging market for some municipalities, we need to make sure that we can get in there sooner rather than later, because there's going to be a full rush of people looking for electric buses. Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Presentation so far today, there's sort of an underlying theme that cities are constructed in a way making sure that transit and other forms of mobility don't work. In the city's framework, there are solutions to that conundrum, if you will. Has the city passed any amendments to its bylaws that implement some of the things that are germane to the future success of the transit or other mobility systems in the city? Or are those bylaws still not being amended or scheduled to be amended this year?
I don't know if I can speak to that directly, if there's any, I don't know of any at this point. So unless you guys, my friends from my city, have any information on this, I'm getting nothing. So I haven't seen anything yet to that effect. So I'll leave it at that.
Every time it's building subdivision.
Yeah, I understand your comment and share your opinion.
I think to Vanessa's comment earlier, it is also about acknowledging that public demand too, right? And so anytime there is a discussion that comes up on the ways of being different options, if there's you know, more demand from the community as well for the services, and I think kind of that larger public discussion, I think. But yeah, and I think looking at how we can move those things forward in a yeah.
All right, I think we need to move on. Thank you so much. Okay, so our next presentations are going to be from James Fick and Gerald Wang. James is works for SAS Power is a lead consultant in EVs and electrification in the customer solution and strategy department. And Gerald Wang is a professor, an assistant professor in electronic systems engineering here at the University of Regina. So with that introduction, James.
Thanks. Get my timer going here so I don't go over. All right. Hi, everybody. Like Robin mentioned, my name is James Fick. I have one of the longer titles you might hear. I'm the consultant lead in EVs and electrification within customer solutions at SAS Power. If you want an explanation of what that means, feel free to ask me after. So I'll start off just talking about some high level SAS Power strategy items. So firstly, SAS Power's mission is as it has been for a few years now, and that is ensuring reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective power for our customers and the communities that we serve. And I mention this because that strategy remains the same even as we look to the future and we have more electrification technologies coming on. One of our main goals will be to kind of live up to this mission and kind of continue to achieve it as we go into the future. We're also often asked about SAS Power's power mix. So a couple things I'll emphasize here. The vast majority of our generation currently is natural gas, making up about 40%. And we still have about 24% from conventional coal. Renewables make up about between 30 and 35% of the current generation mix. And this graph that's here is current as of about the end of March of this year. So one thing that's kind of become a topic of conversation within the last week or two is SAS Power's path to net zero. And so we are on track to meet our stated goal of at least 50% GHG emissions reductions from 2005 levels by 2030. As I mentioned, we're between 30 and 35 right now. So that kind of lends itself pretty well to the future and us being able to achieve this target. There are currently plans to add over a gigawatt of renewables roughly by the end of 2027, including about 600 megawatts of wind and over 400 megawatts of solar. So to the topic at hand, EVs in Saskatchewan. So I kind of firstly like to start off by talking about the growth. And so although the EV population in the province is still relatively small compared to some other jurisdictions in Canada, the rate of growth is actually pretty quick. The numbers I got there, you're talking about roughly a 6-fold increase in the span of about 3 years. And so not only is the population growing rather quick, but the rate of increase is also growing. And so we'll look to see more and more EVs on our roads in the future and have more of them coming even faster. We're also seeing more charging. Granted, we're probably not still where we'd like to be, but we are gradually seeing more fast charging ports, public fast charging ports. Currently got about 120 ports spread across 30 plus locations. One of SAS Power's initiatives to support the development of more public fast charging was our electric vehicle infrastructure program. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And lastly, we're often asked, does driving an EV in the province actually reduce your emissions, considering, you burn natural gas and burn coal to generate the power? And the answer is yes. The number we typically use is it represents about a 30% emissions reduction. And as we go into the future and we bring on more of those renewables that I mentioned earlier, that number, the emissions reductions will increase, which is ultimately what we're hoping for. When we talk about kind of SAS Power's efforts on EVs, we focus on kind of three main areas, those being education and awareness, load management, and infrastructure. And before I jump into those, I'll maybe quickly talk about what SAS Power is actually doing itself. So we are gradually incorporating some EVs into our fleet. We've currently got 3 Hyundai Ioniqs that we've actually had for a few years. We currently have 2 Ford F-150 Lightning trucks with more of those on order. We've got a couple electric Ford Transit vans, and we actually have a couple electric bucket trucks on order that I think are slated to come maybe late this year or early next year. And we also have charging going in at our facilities, obviously, to support those electric vehicles as they come online. And really, we're kind of at the phase now where we're trying to see what sort of use cases these vehicles fill for our fleet. And figure out, where it's the most practical to bring EVs on right now, and kind of see how that changes over time. When it comes to, education and awareness, we kind of see one of our most important roles when it comes to EVs about providing information and resources to our customers to help them make informed decisions when it comes to deciding if an EV is right for them, for their family, for their business, whatever it may be. Understanding the perspectives of current and future EV owners is an important part of this. We collaborate with and work with the EV associations in the province quite a bit. You'll hear a talk later from Matt Pointer with the Saskatchewan Electric Vehicle Association. We work with them quite a bit. But really, it all kind of goes back to understanding those perspectives. We have a very broad customer base. You think about anywhere from residents all the way up to, small, medium business to large commercial, large industrial customers, and they all have different use cases. And so we're working on trying to understand those and figure out how SAS Power can support our customers, both in kind of making an informed decision and ultimately support them in incorporating EVs into their fleet. And we also like to share a lot of information, and that's through our website, saspower.com/EV. So we have a few resources on there. If you have any questions about that, you can always feel free. There's a contact info on there, and I'm usually the one that checks that. So feel free to reach out through there. The next piece is load management. So, pretty simply, load management refers to managing the load from EV charging to really limit the impacts on the electrical system. The normal term you hear is off-peak charging, right? The idea of moving that EV charging load off-peak. And so it really kind of goes back to this idea of how can we most efficiently incorporate this new load. EVs will represent a pretty significant load increase, but that represents both a challenge and an opportunity, and effective load management really helps SAS Power kind of make the most of the opportunity while also addressing the challenge that comes along with that. In addition, load management has been shown to kind of have positive impacts on reliability, cost effectiveness, and sustainability when it comes to transitioning to electrified transport. And so it's one of the strategies we're focusing on quite heavily. It also provides opportunities for our customers to potentially participate in charging incentive programs that can help offset some of their bills or things like that as they consider making the transition to an EV. A couple things too I'll highlight. The Smart Charge Saskatchewan program was first of its kind in the province EV charging study. So that charging study was really just to gather baseline data set to understand how EV drivers in the province drive their vehicles and how they charge their vehicles. So that ran from March 2021 until about March of 2022, had I would say around 75 continuously active participants. And that's kind of leading to an upcoming program called Smart EV Rewards. That's slated to launch in a couple weeks here. And that program will look to build on the Smart Charge, and we'll kind of gather additional data, while also we'll have a couple groups that will be provided incentives to engage in certain charging behavior. And again, it's to kind of evaluate and see the effectiveness of different strategies to move some of that charging load off peak, like I mentioned earlier. And last but certainly not least, I think when lots of people think about SAS Power and electrified transportation, they think about infrastructure, and typically it breaks down into two conversations, one being the provincial electrical system and the other one being charging infrastructure. So I mentioned the electric vehicle infrastructure program earlier, and so that program is a funding program to support highway fast charging development, provided funding to third parties with a focus on increasing the amount of charging on key highway corridors in the province in areas of need. To date, we've got 5 agreements signed for the program. I would expect probably at least another 4 to be signed here in the coming weeks. And I'm happy to say the first 2 projects funded by this program actually just recently went online. They're owned by Riverbend Co-op, who operates stations in Davidson and Outlook. So we're real excited for them and for the province to have more charging available in those areas. Next, we're always working on kind of development and piloting of new standards for grid development. Really kind of gives us the opportunity to look at what upgrades are required in new and existing neighborhoods, and really what's going to be required going into the future to facilitate the adoption of electrification technologies, whether it's EVs or heat pumps were mentioned earlier and things like that. So we're looking at ways of preparing the grid for the future, so that we can handle the adoption of these new technologies as they come. And lastly, kind of a big piece of this all is the idea of forecasting and planning. So we have a lot of forecasting and planning that goes on internally, look at rates of adoption and figure out, how is that going to impact the grid going forward. Some of the big work that's happened here and has leveraged some of the data from the programs I mentioned earlier has been a project that just ended kind of early this year with Dr. Wang here at the U of R. The EV Impact Research Project was kind of one of the first projects we worked on, and then we'll be looking to kind of build on that here in the future. We have one upcoming that is a follow-up to that project, which is the Electrification Impact and Mitigation Strategies on Urban and Residential Grids. So that will combine what we've already done, looking at EVs and the impact on the urban residential grid, and add on to that, as well as look to bring in some aspects of electric heat. And then second to that as well, there is the infrastructure, EV infrastructure design optimization and emission evaluations toward full-scale net zero transportation project that was actually referred to earlier by that's being led by Dr. Tang. And so we're happy and excited to kind of participate in both of those projects. And with that, I will actually turn it over to Dr. Wang, who can give you a bit more information about the research we've worked together on so far. I'll show you my question slide, but we'll save questions for the end. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gerald Wang. I'm an assistant professor in electronic system engineering at the University of Regina. Today, I'm gonna talk about the particular project that's mentioned by James. The title for the project is Electrical Vehicle and its Impact on Power Grid. This is a complete project in the past 1.5 years, right? We just completed in February of this year. So the goal of this project to evaluate the impact of EV penetration on Saskatchewan's urban residential power distribution system and develop some plans to cope with the EV load growth. So we mainly did the following 3 things. We developed a data-driven parameterized EV model based on actual EV charging data. And then we did a load flow study to evaluate the impact of those EV charging on the power distribution systems. Right. Then we developed a optimal EV charging model to see how we can, change people's charging behaviors to mitigate any negative impact. Just a couple words of challenge of UV penetration. The first thing is it's required grid capacity and diffusion system upgrade, right? So large scale charging of EVs can lead to increased electricity demand, particularly during peak hours. Identify those areas with high UV concentration and proactively upgrading the distribution system is essential. And the other thing I think James also mentioned is load balancing and smart charging. EV charging load pattern can have a significant impact on the load balancing. Implementing smart charging programs that incentive EV owners to charge during off-peak hours or actively manage their charging patterns can help distribute the load more evenly. Right? That can be very helpful. I won't talk any details about the model. Instead, I'm going to show you guys some data and some results. So as I mentioned, so our study first studies some actual data. So those actual data were collected by Philippe Kama through a pilot program from April 2021 to March 2022. This is roughly a year, right? We don't have a full year data, but then we have 10 months full data on that. So this pie chart shows the application in the pilot program. So Philippe Kama received 124 applications from the EV owners, and then they accept 109. Eventually, there were 91 EV owners actually installed the device and activated and start to collect data. The data including the charging data every 5 minutes and also their trip distance. So in the last 3 months, there are still 77 active participants. Okay. So just an example, look at the pie chart. So this shows the vehicle made and model. More than half of them are Tesla, right? Model 3, and there's some others, Bolt EV, Volt, Nissan Leaf, etc. Okay. This just shows the overall picture, how many EVs are there, and what's the percentage of different mode. This graph shows the bottom graph shows the average monthly distance traveled and their energy consumed, right? So this bar chart shows that this axis is energy consumption, average daily. So this is only for the about 80 EVs, right? So this line chart showing that this axis is their traveling distance. I did some quick calculation, show some samples from different months, so that you get a sense of what's going on there. So in September, the average daily traveling distance was 48 kilometers per day, and they assumed 9.3 kilowatt per day per vehicle, right? So this comes with about 0.19 kilowatt hour per kilometer. And this is roughly a right data, right? So if you look at the new Model 3, they claim that their efficiency is about 0.14 kilowatt hour per kilometer. So, all right, so in December, the data, the traveling distance is 39.7 kilometers per day, energy consumption 14.7 kilowatt per day. It comes with 0.37 kilowatt hour per kilometer. We can see the cold climate can have a very big impact on how the EV perform, right? In February, it's even colder. We can see that, I can move this around. Their energy consumption is 0.42 kilowatt hour per kilometer. So we can see the efficiency down, down more than even 50%. So just also keep this in some context, the average daily driving distance in Saskatchewan in 2021 was 43 kilometers per day. Oh, yeah, share it. Yeah, I think we're sharing that. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So, these early adopters, EV adopters, driving similar distance, right? So we can see average is about 43 kilometer. So that's some of the data. In this figure shows the average charging energy by vehicle models, right? So the main takeaway here in this figure, I just want to show you, actually, a lot of people are using level 2 charge, right? This bar, this color is level 2, and this level 1, and this dark color is DC fast charging, right? When we talk about level 2, it's anything between 3 kilowatt to 20 kilowatt. Level 1 is below 2 kilowatt. And DC fast charging is somewhere between 50 kilowatt to 800 kilowatt. Right? So that's this. Also, we can see that a lot of vehicles do not even support DC fast charging, right? Not all the vehicles support DC fast charging. Right? And the other data is more than 60% of EV are charged from home, right? More than 60% of that. All right, so this since we're talking about the impact to power grid, we need to consider those electricity load without EV charging. And this figure shows average load profile of 98 houses on some hot days in Regina in 2022. And this is accurate data collected by smart meters. Right? So this average data is already diversified. So we can see that we have some peak demand in the early evening, which is as expected. So we anticipate that if people come home plugging their EV to charge their EV, they will make the peak demand even higher. Right? That's our assumption. So this is the actual EV charging profile. This is average daily EV charging profile of 74 vehicles in the residential sectors in September 2021. The interesting about this, we anticipate that people come home and charge the EV, but actually a lot of people charge their EV after midnight, which is very nice, right? So they have some knowledge about how the power system operated. They have an understanding of peak demand can be harmful. So they can set up a timer to delay their charging. Make sure that, also they need to make sure that before they drive, they have enough energy. So that's one of the findings we got. Now I want to talk about the impact to the power system. So we did quite a few scenarios, but I only show you one of the scenarios, which is the impact on the 15-horse power distribution system. And this is very typical power distribution system in Saskatchewan. So 15 horse means that one transformer supply 15 horses. In this figure shows that one transformer here rated 100 kVA. They have this. They have two lines. One line support 8 horses. Another line support 7 horses. Right. So I'm gonna pay a little attention to the bus 1. Right. Bus 1 is a horse that the furthest away from the transformer, which tend to have the lowest voltage. So again, we conduct some scenarios, and this slide shows one of the scenario. In this scenario, we have 2 passenger EVs per house, right? Which is actually it's high penetration, right? 2 EVs per house. We did some statistical analysis to find a worst scenario. So I won't go through any details about that. So a scenario we selected with peak at 168 kVA, such that the peak demand will be lower than that value in 99.7%. So we run the simulation model 500 times and select a worst scenario, right? So in other words, if the power distribution system can accommodate this scenario, this system will be reliable in 99.7% of time, right? That's the idea behind it. But in fact, our system cannot handle this situation, right? I'll show you what situation they can handle. As we can see, so this red line is the the load without EV charging that's collected by smart meters. And this blue curve shows the load plus the EV charging, okay? So we can see the peak load, right, is 168, and our transformer rated power is 100 kVA. Certainly, so the transformer is overloaded with 30 EV charging. Right? So this figure shows the voltage at bus 1, which is far away from the transformer. We can see that at some time the voltage below 110, right? So which is not desired. We want to keep the voltage always above 110. But what the system can handle is up to 22 EVs. Okay, this is 99.7% of time we can handle 22 EVs, which is not very bad, right? So you can hear people say, "Oh my God, we have 100 kilowatt-hour battery need to charge," but in fact we don't, right? You don't come home with an empty battery, right? So average consumption is about 20 kilowatt-hour, right, per day. Things like that, right? So that's this study. But if we have more vehicles with a higher charging level, we may end up some problems, right? We need to prepare for that too. In the last slide, I want to show you the optimal charging model we developed. Again, there are no details about the model. It's only some results. So this figure shows the results. So the green curve is the aggregate load without controlled EV charging. This blue curve shows using the designed optimal charging model, the result, right? We can see that we can reduce the peak demand from 168 down to about 75 kilowatt. Right? This is about 56% of reduction. And we can see the load profile is even more flat than the original load curve, meaning that the current situation. Right? And this is the ideal situation. Assume that we have direct control of EV charging. Right? So we need to come up with a method, some incentive, some smart charging program to encourage people to follow this desired charging pattern. I think that's all I want to say. I guess we are open to any questions. Thank you.
Questions for Dr. Lang and right? Yeah, it's on your modeling there. You said there's 100 days for your power distribution. Even if you go past your peak down at 168 for your daily load, right? You're still going to blow your power distribution, which then makes it a very unlevel grid. What is the connection and correlation between your smart charging systems, your meters, and your vehicle? Because inevitably everything's going to unless there's some communication coordination, you're going to have a very power system.
Yeah, that's so maybe some comments for first part. That's a very good comments. Even you pass the 100 kVA, it's okay. So in our study, we can actually consider that, right? You can pass it for 2 hours. If you pass the 4 hours is some temperature. We consider that in our study. The other thing is, yes, we need some communication. We need the infrastructure in order to coordinate the EV charging. Currently, if we implement some smart charging program, it's almost like open loop control. So we encourage people to follow this pattern. We don't know if they follow or not. So I'm not sure if James will add.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would say is just because somebody comes home and plugs their vehicle in right away, doesn't mean it's charging right away, right? So they can program their vehicle to charge, say I want my vehicle to charge from 2 in the morning till 6 in the morning or something like that, right? I think there are a variety of ways to approach that, right? It can be things like active control where you would have volunteers sign up and could provide, theoretically could offer the utility control if there was some sort of abnormal event. But like Gerald, one of the more common ways to do it is through passive, which is like the incentive program I mentioned earlier, which is, if you charge your vehicle between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m., we're going to give you a couple cents a kilowatt hour or something like that to encourage that type of behavior. And I think it's something we kind of have to monitor over time. And so with some of the like grid modernization efforts, looking to get more visibility into the urban urban distribution system, we'll start to see where we're maybe starting to encounter issues, and you can do a little bit more targeted approach at that time. I mean, you could, yeah. I mean, I think so. I think the thing is there is going to have to be infrastructure upgrades to handle this stuff in a lot of areas, right? And so part of that is a big piece of that is planning how you do it. Where do you target first? Kind of overlaying the idea of likelihood of adoption with, you know, the vintage of the infrastructure that's there, and kind of figure out where you look at some kind of hot spots on a heat map, and that's where you target first. So I think kind of what Gerald was showing is that you can handle a certain degree of EV penetration as things stand right now, but as we go to the future, obviously improvements will need to be made to the infrastructure to handle.
I know it's very difficult to say, but you know, some of the construction takes 6 to 12 years, so in 2030, 2025, you know, you guys are absolutely the best guess is that based on capacity agreement.
So I haven't, I mean, there are probably numbers floating around. That's not something I have my thumb on, to be honest. I mean, that's more of a supply planning question, but I mean, we are looking at like the planned load growth, right? And trying to plan accordingly. I think when you talk about efforts to decarbonize the grid, we'll also kind of handle some of these new technologies. That does add a large degree of complexity to it. But I mean, I think we are intending to handle a large amount of load growth. And I think, you know, we talked about adding a bunch of renewables and things like that. We do have plans like I think there's a recently announced plan for a new natural gas plant. And so it's kind of one of the big questions, right, is looking beyond how do we kind of continue to do this and kind of handle base load power, mix that in with renewables and all those sorts of things as the load grows.
Okay. Yes. I'm curious about the figure for the 30% reduction in emissions for EV adoption. Is that based on like factory efficiency number, or is it based more on a real world model showing here that in the winter actually a lot?
Yeah, so like, I mean, that's kind of like a rule of thumb number, right? Obviously, if you look at a specific scenario, but largely kind of at a high level, what that's based on is you look at the grid emissions intensity and you compare say like an electric vehicle with an equivalent gas vehicle, and you look at kind of the EPA rated efficiencies of both. So you're comparing apples to apples, right? You're right in that, like, I think winter impacts on an EV are going to be more significant than they are for a gas vehicle, but they are both going to experience efficiency losses. So 30% is kind of a ballpark number. You start mixing in battery electrics and plug-in hybrids, it's going to vary for both as well. So it's kind of a ballpark number, but depending on specific scenarios, it can be as high as over 40%, or it can be a little bit below 30% as well.
Okay, all right. So I think we will stop there. So join me in thanking the. We're going for a 10-minute break. There are a number, I don't know, I think 3 Teslas that are out there just in front of the education building. So the Saskatchewan EV Association has kindly brought them in. So if you're interested, you could walk out there and have a look. Yeah.
Here's the survey. I just started.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, I'm gonna think.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also a survey that we would like you to participate in. I think there's a table on the outside. You just scan a QR code and get access to the survey. I'll remind you again about that towards the end of the symposium. But yeah, let's take a 10-minute break. There's washrooms on both sides over there. Please walk out and have a look at the EV.
This is the camera, so this is going on that.
Yeah, and you can see yourself.
As Roman said too, if someone asks a question, maybe just repeat it. Sure. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, can we get people back in? Okay, I guess those Teslas out there are really attracting everybody. So we're not getting them back in the room. But I think we will continue now. So our next speaker is Matt Pointer. Matt Pointer is with the Saskatchewan Electric Vehicles Association. He is the founder of that association, in fact. And yeah, they are the folks that have been kind enough to bring those vehicles in for us to have a look at. As I say, small introduction. I'll just hand it over to Matt now, and let's hear what Matt has to say.
Great. Shift this over just here. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having us. It's great to be able to speak to folks and participate in these types of events and things. We're very happy to be here. We also have some other members of the EV board down in the third row here who've also graciously brought their cars to hang out for the day. So feel free, when we break after the final presentation, feel free to chat with us if we can address all the questions in the near term after my presentation. So who are we? Well, Saskatchewan Electric Vehicle Association is a nonprofit group. Our mission is to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles in Saskatchewan. We've been advocating for EVs and educating folks since about 2018. We've hosted numerous events and demonstrations throughout the province to date. And we work with various levels of government to ensure EV-friendly policies are developed and put in place. So just out of curiosity, how many people in the crowd have actually attended one of our electric car events over the last 4 or 5 years? Right on. And of those folks, how many of you took a test ride in a car? And of those people, how many of you ended up buying an EV? A few. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we put on a National Drive Electric Week event that will be coming up in September here. We have yet to announce the formal date and location for that, but we will be releasing that hopefully within the next month or so. And we actually just recently hosted a Electrify Regina EV Expo at Connexus Arts Center about 6 weeks ago or so. And it was the largest event we've ever held in our history with over 500 people in attendance. And we're looking to build upon that momentum and get more folks out to obviously educate and also allow people to check out an EV for the first time. So who am I? Obviously, I am the guy on stage presenting today. My history with this is sort of interesting, how I came into EV ownership and ended up founding the group. But basically, I've been driving an EV for about the last 5 years. Since I've started driving electric, I've saved nearly $20,000 in gasoline expenses. And my car has been very, very low maintenance ever since. I basically rotate my tires, I put washer fluid in it, and I put new windshield wiper blades on my car. And so in 5 years, that's the extent of the maintenance that I've had to do. So EVs are very, very low maintenance as they have significantly lesser moving parts. And hence why I am such a strong advocate of them. I had some really garbage cars in the past, and this EV has been fantastic. So charging into the future, right? We're always looking ahead to say, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to build? Who do we need to educate? Who do we need to chat with, right? But we need to figure out where we stand right now as a point of jumping from, right? And so unfortunately, the bad news is we have our work really cut out for us. Here in Saskatchewan, we're actually dead last as rated by Efficiency Canada for efficient transport standards. So we have a large amount of work to go in order to even break out of dead last place, to be honest. And some of that has to do with the ability to get people in cars with or without subsidies. I'm not saying everything needs to be subsidized in order to get EVs in the hands of people, but it certainly brings down the cars to a price parity or a more cost-effective price point for people. And right now, essentially in the EV industry, it's a race to the bottom. The $20,000 to $25,000 car is, right around the corner here. And so we're really excited to see those more cost-effective models coming out, because typically it's the cost of the vehicles that ends up being the biggest reason why people aren't driving electric currently. But aside from that, a big part of EV ownership is charging infrastructure. And if we're choosing to push this technology, we need to make sure that we have strong infrastructure set up ahead of time. It's kind of a chicken or the egg type of approach. And it's sort of like the bike lane thing, right? If you build it, they will come, right? And EV ownership is very similar to that. Once upon a time when I first got my car, I remember driving home from Calgary, and it took me nearly 18 to 19 hours to drive home from Calgary in my vehicle, which most people shake their head at and say, like, you're absolutely nuts for doing that. It's because the charging infrastructure didn't exist at the time. But now fast forward nearly 5 years, and I can do that same trip in about 7 hours. So it's not much different than a gas car at all. And in fact, it's much, much cheaper than a gas car. So with charging infrastructure in mind, we need to make sure that we have new construction housing really being the key point, because 95% of all charging essentially happens at home. And so we need to be looking at a focus of pre-wiring chargers into all new residential buildings here in Regina as part of the Sustainable City Framework. And I won't speak too much on their behalf, but this is certainly a policy that we would like to see in place with the city moving forward. It's a critical one. And I'm not saying build the charger, we're just saying have the wiring set up, or at least have the conduit in place. And also have the conversation about electrical capacity for that particular dwelling, right? Is there enough room on the panel to accommodate an EV charger? Keep in mind, in most circumstances, people only require about 24 to 32 amps of power. In most circumstances, typically that's like a stove plug or a dryer plug in most situations. And so once we already have that pre-wiring in place, a lot of people can accommodate a charger in their garage or even outside of their house for that matter, sometimes for as little as $500 from a certified journeyman electrician. So that's pretty cost effective. And obviously the fuel savings pay for the cost of that charger in fairly short order. But having that pre-wiring for residential applications is a critical thing here in Saskatchewan. Another place we need EV charging is actually at our destination. So I'm sure some of us here in the crowd have heard of EV destination charging several times before. Basically, it's where we end up at the end of the day or at points throughout our day. So there's a lot of great reasons to do this because, well, first and foremost, not everybody has an EV charger at home. People might live in an apartment, they might live in a condo. Maybe their condo association does not want to build charging infrastructure inside of their facility. So actually going to the grocery store ends up being a great opportunity for people to charge as they're getting groceries, doing their running around, conducting their daily business. And what's also great is for businesses, because when people come and plug in at your particular location, wherever that may be, essentially now you've got a captive audience of somebody that's sitting there in the car charging and will probably frequent your business. And so this could be a great benefit for a lot of smaller centers throughout the province that have since had a lot of their main business move out of their core main street sort of location and out onto the highway where the people are passing by going from one place to another. So by hosting an EV charger actually on their main street, it can bring all of that traffic back and all of that business back. So that's great for restaurants and other places where people would frequent into olden times. But you know, there's no reason why we can't bring that back for these smaller centers. So it's a great opportunity for smaller towns and things. Also, I mentioned people that live in apartment buildings and things, charging their car when they go to get groceries is also a critical one. And yeah, and out of town folks as well. We hear this quite a bit. People that are coming in to, let's say, go to the football game, or they're here for a swimming competition or a hockey tournament or things like that. The Real District does not have any electric vehicle charging whatsoever. Neither does the football stadium. I'm very glad to hear that the University of Regina is putting a plan into effect for some type of EV charging here. Because it makes that trip so much easier when you can hang out watching your football game as your car's trickle charging, you know, and then leave the game having enough to get back to wherever you drove from, whether it's in town or out of the city. So there is some great opportunities to be had and a lot of great programs that are available for these types of things as well. Another place that we should focus on our charging policies is definitely in condos. We get all types of requests from condo associations all the time that are living in older buildings and they're struggling internally within their condo association to bridge the gap, to look at charging for their facility. And yeah, I've had very many conversations with folks that, you know, try to convince their condo board and say, I can't believe they just won't let us do this and all the rest of it. And there are some ways to accommodate this with some new technology that's out there now. But the big thing is that we need to make sure in the future that all new residential or multi-unit residential buildings end up having that focus on at least pre-wiring that facility, having the capacity in the electrical system to accommodate EV charging in the future. And there's no reason why it can't be done. It's already been done in every other jurisdiction besides Saskatchewan. A lot of newer buildings that are going up, especially the high-rise condos with underground parking and things, they've actually pre-wired it so that it can be basically converted into EV charging. And yeah, the alternative is not great. If you are in an older building that does not have that service or that capacity, it can literally mean hundreds of thousands of dollars in electrical upgrades for that system. And hence the reason why there's some sneaky technology that's out there now to accommodate these. And I can speak to that maybe after the presentation. But the big thing is adopting it early on and making sure it gets in those building bylaws so that can be built into all of these new pieces of infrastructure. I believe the number that I had last heard is it's almost 5 to 6 times more expensive to adapt that building once it's been built versus at the time of construction. So it is a significant higher price. And the great thing is now with the new technology, we have things called load sharing, where essentially we can have one circuit that will accommodate up to 4 vehicles, even 8 or 10 vehicles. And basically it comes in on a prioritization sequence where the car that's got the lowest charge is prioritized first. And then it piece by piece trickles the other cars to top them up to their amount. And what's great about that is it does not consume, it does not require its own circuit for each individual car, which is obviously much easier on the power grid and is a lot easier to accommodate. So there's some great new technology coming out to allow those older buildings to kind of modernize themselves for EV charging. Another big charging opportunity is for fleets. And I know the city had already mentioned a bit about the incoming electric bus fleet, but it's going to be happening coast to coast just because the cost per mile of electric fleets is so much more advantageous to their gasoline or diesel counterparts, especially for in-city deliveries and those types of businesses. So there's a lot of great opportunity. And yeah, also the fossil fuel fleet is typically much more labor intensive because they have so many more moving parts and things. And they require a lot of ongoing service and oil changes and exhaust type related things. As well, those vehicles, if they're in close quarters of people, they're really not that healthy. And that's another great benefit of the electric fleet. And many of these can actually be charged or trickle charged overnight, many of these vehicles in these fleets. And they can charge at those low time uses of the grid, I guess, when it is a little bit easier and perhaps a discounted rate would be great if that happens from SaskPower. Yeah. That would go a long way, I feel like, to incentivize some great charging opportunities. And the other nice thing too, with a lot of these fleet vehicles is a lot of fleet vehicles typically tend to be stop and go. And one of the best examples of that is city buses, garbage trucks, and a variety of other service vehicles. And so I have a few examples of those. And basically all these things are going electric all across the board. And there's a beautiful thing with these, and especially in the garbage truck and the city bus thing, is called regenerative braking. And essentially what it allows you to do is recoup a bunch of that energy and actually spool it back into the battery pack to make sure that the vehicle is a lot more efficient in its day-to-day operation. Otherwise, in a regular gas car, we're just gas, brake, right? And every single time we hit the brake, we're losing a whole bunch of efficiency and we're losing a whole bunch of energy because it's being lost as heat. That's the big bonus with these fleet vehicles is regenerative braking and a much, nicer, quieter overall, and in the long term, more cost-effective vehicle when it comes to city and provincial fleets. Up next, charging infrastructure is desperately needed in rural areas in Saskatchewan. We've done a great job of checking off the Trans-Canada as well as the Yellowhead and other secondary highways in the province. But in order for mass electrification of transport to be adopted, we need to make sure that we've got a lot of charging options available in the various smaller centers. And another big part of that we feel should be a strict policy is actually enforcing a strict uptime of at least 95% of these DC fast chargers throughout the province. So actually forcing the ownership or whoever ends up maintaining or operating those chargers to making sure that they're online and serviceable at least 95% of the time. We've had some bad news stories come out of charging networks that unfortunately were not up to snuff, and that 95% uptake or uptime was not enforced. And so it created a bit of a negative narrative as far as charging, and we felt that this is somewhat of a barrier and created some negative news stories, I guess, that might hinder adoption. So we would prefer to avoid this and jump in with a lot of other jurisdictions by enforcing a minimum serviceability or minimum uptime of at least 95% here in Saskatchewan. So that's a critical point there. And also, being that we are blessed to be a province that has a relatively small population with a large geographical area, we certainly have some interesting situations, right? Where, you know, you might encounter a town of maybe 100 people versus in some of the other bigger places, maybe in Eastern and Western Canada or down in the States, where there isn't a smaller place that's less than 250,000. And so it is a very interesting position for us to be in, to try to accommodate charging in every corner of the province, right? To make sure that everybody has accessibility to EV charging. As well, we have a massive agriculture industry that is poised to start looking at electrification here in the near future. And a lot of those agricultural hubs and farming towns and centers, they're going to be looking for fast charging as well. And it's going to start first at the service vehicles, right? The runaround sort of things, the pickup trucks and things like that. From there, we've seen John Deere combines. We've seen all sorts of other prototypes and platforms that are being planned to electrify as far as the farming fleet goes as well. And they're all going to need their power from somewhere, and they're all going to need to charge from somewhere. So there's going to be some really interesting conversations over the next few years as far as what that looks like. So other types of policies that we feel would go a long way as far as encouraging adoption in the province. And the first one is that the Sask EV tax, we feel is regressive and creates a negative sort of a negative narrative around EV ownership here in Saskatchewan. We launched a program called the Saskatchewan Sidewalk Tax. I'm not sure if anybody had heard of that there a couple of years ago, where we were it's sort of a spoof. I'll let you guys look that one up to research it yourselves. But we feel that at an early stage in this technology, taxing a new technology is just not the right answer. Of course, in the future, we're more than happy to pay our fair share. But being there's basically only 2,000 EVs in the province, you know, we don't feel that's the way to go. You know, to look back, you know, let's say 100 years when we were in the days of the horse and chariot or the horse and buggy or whatever, when the first Ford Model Ts were coming off the lot, do you think they were being taxed? Probably not, right? They were looking to adopt that technology as fast as they possibly can for the betterment. Some might argue the horses were the better option in the long run. And to be honest, people might not realize that, but 100 years ago, electric vehicles were kicking around back then even. Detroit actually had the very first electric vehicle, Porsche, there were several. I'm kind of going on tangents here now, but anyway, a big part of what we need to encourage as well is an EV mandate in Saskatchewan. We're constantly competing for electric vehicle allocation to our local car dealerships. And that's a big struggle because people might leave the audience today and say, hey, you know what, I think I'm going to buy a car this week. And they might go to every dealer in town and not find a single EV for sale that's on the lot. And the reason why is because BC, Ontario, and Quebec get all the allocated vehicles, and we end up getting nothing. And a lot of times it's only the special order cars that end up getting the sales. And so we would feel that an EV mandate of at least 5% of all new vehicles sold in Saskatchewan would be a great thing, just because we are competing with those other bigger provinces. And if people can't find it on the lot, a lot of times people won't buy it. And so we feel that mandate would be very important. Another thing that's really not mentioned a lot either, there's a big focus obviously on the environment, and that is a great focus, no doubt. But actually electrification is a massive job creator. And there's a lot that we have to benefit from here in Saskatchewan and Canada as a whole. And so when we start to look at things like battery minerals, Canada is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has all the minerals available for batteries for the electrification of transport. We're in a very unique position here in Canada to capitalize on these types of things. And hence the reason why there's been so many large investments in battery factories and mines and minerals and things throughout Canada. And so it's something that we should really capitalize on because it's estimated it's going to create at least 500,000 jobs across Canada over the next decade or so, which is a massive amount of jobs and a massive amount of opportunity, and is obviously great for our economy. And yeah, in the last 2 years alone, we've had $5 billion worth of investments in the Canadian auto sector. So that's no joke, right? And those investments are going to continue. And another great thing is Canada, we've got great ethical mining strategies. We are certainly ahead of the game as far as the proper way of developing our resources. And you know, things like cobalt and things that typically have a black eye as far as the economic sort of outlook or the ethical outlook as to the way those minerals are mined in other countries and things. We can mine those here in Canada, and we can do a much better job of it and have those spin-offs here in our economy. So there's a lot of benefit for electrification here in our province. So that's sort of a wrap for me, but just as a final shameless plug here, we're looking for committee members to help us out across southern Saskatchewan with various events. And we're also looking for some board members to expand and grow our association as much as possible. A lot of what we do is public education events and things like these. So we're always looking for people that are interested in joining and helping us out. And if you're curious and would like to join us or become a member, check out sivaonline.ca. And there's a lot of information about EVs here in Saskatchewan and our efforts to get more people driving electric. So that in mind, I'll leave some room for questions.
Whether CAA is thought about doing a mobile charger?
CAA. So the question was, has anybody Oh,
Picks up your car.
yeah. Yeah. So the question is basically is CAA as a highway sort of fixer type tow truck service, if they're going to offer a charging opportunity as part of the tow truck. Yeah, and so actually that has not yet happened in Canada, but the AAA, American Auto Association, they've actually already had that for about 5 years. And so most of the time, if people do have an issue, they'll come and plug in. I think they can fast charge the car for up to 5 minutes or something. And that's usually enough time in order to get you to your destination. So it is something that's coming. It's on the horizon for sure. Any other questions?
People talk about the possibility that generation of electric cars coming. They're going to market in the next couple of years, a lot of them. One of the biggest concerns is the battery stuff. Can you speak to that at all? It seems to be a mental block.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So I'll just repeat that here for the recording. So the question was about having the back in your head, basically the question of battery replacement, and is that an issue for people going forward with electrification and maintenance and stuff and so forth, right? So far we've had a really strong track record as far as vehicles not requiring any battery replacement. There's been the odd car that was involved in a minor type of incident where, let's say, it was an early generation vehicle that didn't have the same software, it didn't have the same engineering or technology put into it. Let's say this is a 10-year-old vehicle. Some of those were known for their early degradation or their poor degradation or poor quality of batteries. But over the last 10 years or so, things have changed significantly. And one of the biggest reasons for change is because they've actually put a battery management system in the cars and a thermal management system that kind of goes hand in hand with that. So basically what that means is that the car has an air conditioned system that takes care of the battery in the summer and a heating system in the wintertime. So what that does is it prevents premature degradation of the battery over the long term. And the same car that I drive, the Tesla Model 3, there's people that are driving it as a full-time taxi service, literally all over the world. And there's people now that have 300,000 plus miles on the vehicle, and they're still sitting at about that 95 to 96% battery health. And so the vehicles have been holding up extremely well. There's another good example down in the States. There's a company called Tesloop, and they run a bunch of older generation Tesla Model X's and Model S's from way back. And It was actually a young kid who started this taxi service that runs between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. And they run 24 hours a day in these cars, just chauffeuring people back and forth, basically for big parties. And they found in the first 5 or 6 years, they had 500,000 or 600,000 miles on the original battery and motor or engine on those cars. And they're still sitting at 80 to 85% battery health. And they did everything wrong you could possibly ever do to those cars. They charged them to 100%, they drove them to 0%, fast charged them all the way back to 100%, and then drove them all the way back down to 0%. And they were in the desert 95% of the time. So the longevity of the batteries has been significant. And over the long term, I think they're going to get better. However, there is warranty that is directly for the engine, motor, electric motor, whatever you want to call it, and the battery pack as well. So on most cars, it's somewhere between 150 to 200,000 on the battery pack and drivetrain. And so far that seems to be holding up really good. And I've only heard of one battery replacement locally. So the numbers are in our favor for sure. And then also, if you've saved that much money by not buying gasoline, you have the cash to, replace the battery with, right? So we're hoping that the cost of a battery replacement in the next few years will probably be somewhere between the $5,000 and $7,000 mark, which is equivalent to a brand new motor in an internal combustion engine vehicle anyway. So it's going to be at parity here really soon. Any other questions?
We'll move on to the next.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So our final presentation for today is by John Axon. John Axon is a professor in SFU, right? Simon Fraser University, in the Department of Resource and Environmental Management. He is joining us through Zoom. And we'll speak on, I don't actually know. Policy. On policy. Really good. All right, with that, John, sorry about that. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, as long as one of us knows. I'm going to pause though, just to check. I guess you're going to see my slides, perhaps not me, and that's fine. Is my voice coming through all right for this room? Can I get some indication of that?
We can see you in a little box. We can see you're small, but you're visible. And then we see your slides very big. And we can hear you well.
And you can hear me well. Okay, that's a good thing. Yeah, well, do stop me if something phases out there. Small but visible is fine with me. Okay, so I'm gonna get right going here, and actually I think this kind of works out quite well for timing. Matt just gave a very nice overview of a lot of different topics, and so I know you've covered that then, and I might be able to just kind of refer to some of these things without having to re-explain it. So I'm going to take much of this and pick up on the conversation and the dialogue about what policies would be or could be, effective in achieving, these high sales goals we want for electric vehicles, for a variety of reasons. And I'm going to present a few different pieces of evidence for, which are more likely to be effective, particularly thinking of the case of Saskatchewan and Regina's present questions. So just, laying this out, I'm going to be very big picture here. From the global perspective, we are talking about net zero as what we're going for greenhouse gas emissions, for try to, avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We're already having plenty of impacts, but let's not have the nightmare scenarios come true. And, as a more recent reference point, the International Energy Agency has put out this net zero scenario of what combinations of technologies across different sectors would be, one way of getting to the net zero. And really many different government stakeholders have latched on to the trajectory, especially for light duty vehicles, of showing, or, looking at how rapidly we need to go towards zero emissions vehicles in order to do most of the heavy lifting in that sector for decarbonization. So we're talking about, battery electric, plug-in hybrid, maybe fuel cell vehicles, but together the zero emissions vehicles being dominating the sector by 2030. And most regions, developed countries, are looking at this as a 100% sales goal by 2030 to 2035 is that range. So we need to get moving quickly. And but this is a big distinction between the goal or the idea of getting there and the policy. And so, this was just put out a few days ago by the International Council on Clean Transportation. They're looking at the few regions that have binding targets. So it's not just having a target, but having the regulation behind it to get to 100% passenger zero emissions vehicles. And so the EU has just put in these strict requirements for 2035. This map here, it's a little, I guess it's a little conservative that, it's showing British Columbia, it's showing the California and a few of the other states. Quebec should be there too. And also Canada nationally is now designing the zero emissions vehicle standard. It's announced, last year with plans to implement that shortly. So that's, there's more coming, but really, there's a lot more promises out there than there are actual commitments. And so with that, that's where we're going to talk about policy. And so I've already kind of been saying this, that goals are different than policy. Goals are great. It's a great way to start your, if you have a weight loss program or fitness program, you want to have some goals to start with, but it's a big difference between setting the goal and actually achieving it. And so in this context, it's, trying to get net zero in Canada by 2050. And in Canada, we're talking about having 100% zero emissions vehicle sales by 2035. Very admirable goals, but policy what we're talking about is the government laws, actions that are implemented towards supporting these societal or social goals. And I'm going to say a bit more about different categories here, but we're talking about taxes, we're talking about incentives, we're talking about regulations, and it's also many of these other things that have been discussed about what you might call more systemic, more infrastructural changes, about whether it's building codes requiring charging, or other kind of measures to support the transition. Again, keeping things bigger picture before I get more specific is that, net zero, I mean, it's lots of things need to happen. It's not just about electric vehicles. And I find it often helpful to think about this analogy of the three legs of a stool, which is just really the math of, reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a function of the carbon intensity of the fuel, the efficiency of your vehicles, and how much those vehicles are being used. Right. And so when we're talking about electric vehicles, we're talking mostly about the fuel switching part, is going from gasoline, diesel towards primarily electricity, low carbon electricity, in order to reduce emissions that way. Those vehicles are also more efficient than conventional gasoline and diesel vehicles. So that works a little bit on the efficiency leg as well. But there's also, a whole other set of initiatives that are needed to address just the total amount of driving, to reduce VKT through more sharing, through more active travel, more public transit, potentially more, Zoom calls, I guess, like what I've done here, or working from home, that's all part of it. But that said, with this big, framework here, the research is quite clear that most of the heavy lifting for decarbonization in this sector can be done through the electrification of vehicles. And that's why I'm going to keep focusing on that moving forward. But keeping that in mind, we can look at the different policies also in terms of which legs of the stool they might address. And so I have the same three legs here as these columns. And so, the regulatory policies, which was alluded to a little bit in that last presentation there, is, these are regulations, laws, requirements with firm penalties for non-compliance, and they tend to focus more on specific technologies. So we have low carbon fuel standards, or clean fuel standard in Canada, that is requiring the carbon content of fuels to be reduced. Nationally, we have vehicle emission standards that require improvements in the efficiency of vehicles over time. And then one big theme is a zero emissions vehicle sales mandate. This is requiring automakers to meet a minimum market share of new vehicle sales being zero emissions in that region, with a very stiff penalty for non-compliance. So this policy was started in 1990 in California, has gone through many iterations since, but is very, there's lots of research showing how much it has been able to channel innovation and induce many of the breakthroughs that we have seen in the technology so far. And so that's going to be a theme of what I'm talking about, is how important to think about having regulation as probably the backbone policy in a policy mix for a given region to drive the adoption of zero emissions vehicles. But also you need to be thinking about the other ones too. Conversations are also talking about the economic type policy. So the classic being pricing. And of course, this is not talking about, putting a price on the electric vehicles. Like, I know this is an issue that you're working with in Saskatchewan, but putting a price on carbon. And, we have national carbon pricing and gasoline taxes, and there can be various road prices, but these tend to be the favored tool of economists for a variety of reasons. I mean, it can address all three legs of the stool. If it's more expensive to use gasoline, people are going to buy more electric cars. They're going to drive more efficiently. They're going to drive less. So it kind of hits all those, those legs of the stool fairly well. Although, yeah, there's a whole issue of political acceptability that I'll get to in a moment. And then there's also the incentives. This is kind of the other side of the economic perspective, is saying, well, use government funds, taxpayer funds to help induce buyers, make the price of zero emissions vehicles more affordable. And so that's a lever to look at as well. And then finally, there's more of these systemic policies I've mentioned, and this is expanding the infrastructure and information provision programs and all that. And so really, in every region that is doing really anything substantial towards electric vehicles, it's not just about one policy, it's about a policy mix. And that's really the key for any region that's seriously considering this, is what mix of policies, how do you put them together in a way that's going to be effective and also ticking off a number of other boxes. And so that's what I'm going to lay out for you, is that, to evaluate a policy mix, it's not just about effectiveness. I mean, that's certainly the first criterion, is like, is that policy going to actually help you lead to an incremental increase in zero emissions vehicle sales? Is it going to cut greenhouse gas emissions? So absolutely, you want to start there. The second criterion to think about is efficiency of it, though. Is it saying that helps you achieve your goal, but is it doing it in a way that's at a least cost to society? You don't want to have some wasteful goal that or policy that's forcing this whole technology we don't need, that's way more expensive than what we need. So that's where economists will tend to focus, is on that second one. But if you only focus on that second one, then you're going to come out with a conclusion that carbon pricing is all you need. Unfortunately, the research my team and many others have done is that if you only go with carbon pricing, it's going to be a huge tax, right? You need a very huge price signal to do all the heavy lifting in this sector. And then that goes against the third criterion here, which is just, well, are your politicians going to put it in place in the first place? Are they going to keep it in place? And are the voters going to support it? Or is there going to be, just a huge amount of opposition there? So that's a huge thing to think about. And I often add this fourth piece too about transformational signal. It can relate to some of the other criteria, but it's really getting at, we are talking about getting out of one system, this fossil fuel based transportation system, and changing the vehicles, the way they're used, the fuels, the electricity behind it, the infrastructure being provided by stakeholders. It's a whole societal and transformative change that needs to occur. And so there's some value to policies that are not only can help to push one more buyer, like a purchase incentive, but something that's going to be durable and sends this clear, confident message that this is where we're going, right? It gives the investors, it gives the automakers, it gives the infrastructure providers, the utilities, gives them all this confidence that this is where we're going, and they make their big investments into this change, so we get there. And so really, you want to be looking at all these things. I'm going to go into more detail on the effectiveness and transformative signal pieces of it. I'll just show one slide on the political acceptability piece. This kind of gives a bit more of my logic. I've already been saying that, it's kind of intuitive that the carbon pricing tends to be less acceptable. But I'm just showing you this visual here. My team, we do a lot of research in a lot of different areas. But one thing, we keep keep feeling the pulse of the Canadian citizens using these demographically representative samples of citizens across the country, and we'll ask about their support or opposition for different types of climate policies. And for ourselves, or really anyone else, internationally who's doing this kind of research, tends to find the same kind of things, that when it comes to pricing mechanism, carbon tax, gas tax, road pricing, there's a lot of opposition, a lot more opposition than any other policy. And so it's politically risky to rely too much on that, is the way I would interpret that. Whereas for the rest of this slide is showing you that really for most of the other policies we ask about, there's a lot more support, a lot of support for having subsidies, for having charger deployment. And what I bring a particular attention to is the bottom three kind of rows there, or bars of this graph, is the different regulations that I've mentioned already. A strong vehicle emission standard, low carbon fuel standard, or even a very strong zero emissions vehicle mandate tends to get a lot more support than opposition, and certainly stays well away from the huge red opposition zone of most of the carbon pricing or other pricing mechanisms we see. So just to say, I see this window here where kind of a policy window of where regulations, they're able to have the same large impact if they're designed well, without annoying or really upsetting the huge amounts of citizens at the very least. Industry reaction will be a little different, and that's something we'll talk a little bit about how automakers in Canada are trying to influence this. But so with all that in mind, there's lots to look at, but I'm not, I'm going to get to giving you a few key results here, but I want to say just a little bit about method of and this is going to be short, but just to give you a sense of, to help inform this idea of what policy mix is going to be able to tick off these different criteria, be more optimal for us. My own team we do lots of surveys, we do lots of quantitative modeling, we do lots of life cycle analysis. We try to put it all together to make meaningful inputs to the policy design process. And our most recent version is the AUM model. I just want to share it just a little bit with you, is that it's designed for Canada, for Canadian regions, to be able to simulate these different policy combinations that I've been talking about. So we can simulate the effects of carbon pricing, of vehicle purchase incentives, of regulations, and different mixes as well, and how they might overlap or work against each other, or however that may look. And then we have the model, so it's then producing, currently we use it with a 2020 to 2035 timeframe, really focusing forward looking on what the impacts of that policy mix will be on greenhouse gas emissions, on zero emissions vehicle sales, and then also impacts on the society, on automaker profits, on consumer surplus, which together make up the policy costs in the economist perspective. And we also have can look at what that does to automaker investment in research and development, and really kind of change in the system that way. So to achieve all of these, this is the AUM model. I know this is a big, messy graph, but I have the 1 minute version here. I'm going to break it down to say this is a big model, quantitative model. What we have is a consumer model. So just representing how consumers in Canada, different segments of consumers, how they value zero emissions vehicles or not, and there are different attributes. And this is based on different iterations of demographically representative surveys we've done of Canadians, large sample surveys where we've done statistical analyses of how different segments of consumer new car buyers in Canada value different vehicles. And so we have the enthusiasts are in there, the first buyers, and we have the laggards, and we have everyone in between, and they're all being represented in this model. And then what's unique is that the model also represents automaker decisions, which is key. And it was alluded to in that last talk there, that automakers are making decisions all the time about what do they do? How do they prioritize their investment in zero emissions vehicles, how they price those vehicles, where they make those vehicles available, and how much inventory to provide, how much marketing to do. There's lots of things that they're deciding. And so we put that directly in the model. We have this automaker who's maximizing, like an aggregate automaker, maximizing profits in the long term, looking at the consumer market. And then we have this interaction where automakers are setting prices in a way to try to maximize profits, and they're determining how, when to invest in making more makes and models available, making more, electric pickup trucks available, for example, and how to set those prices so they're able to achieve their profit maximizing goals while complying with whatever policies they have to comply with. So that's the model in a nutshell, and then it gives us all these other inputs for these things I mentioned as things we want to be able to analyze. And so I can cut right to the chase of the kind of results we get from that. And we've applied this model in really a pile of different applications so far. We have I've been working with the national government and different stakeholders elsewhere in Canada. We're very interested in using this model to understand policy design for these kinds of goals. And so I can this one project here will give you a very quick sense of how it works. And so here we were looking at, well, if Canada is serious about this 100% zero emissions vehicle goal by 2035, let's look at different policy pathways. So we have all our current policies nationally. We have some carbon pricing, we have a patchwork of purchase subsidies and so on. So we had that as a baseline. And then we said, okay, what if we do on top of that, add a strong zero emissions vehicle sales mandate of different designs, just requiring automakers to comply with a $5,000 to $10,000 penalty for each vehicle they fall short of that goal. So that's in line with how that policy works in other regions. Or what if we do it with a vehicle emission standard, just requiring the grams of CO2 per kilometer to be decreasing each year for new vehicles being sold. That's more the EU model for this kind of regulation. Or what if we do a fee-based system? And this is having a combination of a purchase subsidy with a vehicle tax. So we're trying to have a revenue neutral system where you're subsidizing the electric vehicles being purchased, and then you're taxing the gas guzzling vehicles being purchased, and you're working out a whole system that's really revenue neutral from the government perspective. So at the very least, they're not having to use taxpayer dollars to pay off the electric vehicles. So we tried all these different, these and different combinations of these. And to start with, using that model I just described, where we have a realistic representation of actual Canadian car buyers and a realistic representation of how automakers might make decisions, we show that really any of those policies, if they're strong enough, could be enough to pretty much get us up to that 100%, or at least the 90 to 100% ZEV sales goal by 2035. And so if it falls, this little graph here, this is just showing one of the median scenarios. We do all this uncertainty analysis as part of it here, but it's really saying, if it falls short there, it's just saying that, well, automakers with a regulation, they brought it up to 97% sales, and they just paid the penalty for non-compliance because it was so hard to sell to the last 3% of consumers or whatever it was. But I won't dwell on that. But just to say that really, any of those policies can be made strong enough to get there. But of course, there'll be trade-offs in how they actually, some of the other aspects of those policies. And so one is just, the different levels of greenhouse gas emissions that come from that. So this is looking at the same scenarios. We have the baseline up there for light duty vehicle sector. And then, really we have, if this, what this speaks to is that combining more of these strong policies can lead to a bigger net effect. And we saw this kind of special synergy between having multiple regulations layered on top of each other. So having a vehicle emission standard like we do in Canada and like the EU has just put in very strongly, and then adding a zero emissions vehicle mandate on top of that. Together, there's some redundancy there, but we find that it actually sends kind of a double signal to automakers to invest even more heavily in electric vehicles, and more of the momentum is built in order to make that transition earlier, while also leading to more greenhouse gas emissions. Also not shown here is that when we look at a policy costing analysis, or kind of the welfare costs, dollars per ton reduced, that combination is one of the most efficient, having a zero emissions vehicle mandate plus a vehicle emission standard. So that gives you, some piece of the argument towards this potential for regulations. Now, a second or kind of extension of this is we're looking more in detail at subsidies, and this is something that people often the first thing we think about is, well, just subsidize. People love purchase subsidies, and absolutely, that you add a $5,000, $10,000 purchase subsidy, you will increase sales in your region. There's tons of literature showing that in many different countries, regions. So that's clear. But should that be your main strategy? And particularly we brought this up because recently, the auto industry, or many members of the auto industry in Canada, have been lobbying government saying, don't regulate us, just go with a subsidy strategy. That's the way. Just give some subsidies. That'll help us achieve that goal. Don't put on the regulations. So we decided to explore that. And what we did is we took the proposal that was being batted around of saying, upping a purchase subsidy nationally to $15,000 per electric vehicle. So, quite a large subsidy, keeping that in place. And we said, let's have a version where we keep it in place for 5 years, for 10 years, and for 15 years to see what that does. And kind of the bad news with that strategy is that none of those, even the 15-year version, was not enough to get all the way up to that 2035 target. It increases sales for sure, but it doesn't stimulate all these other kind of market forces that you want to see of more automaker investment and more deployment of the broader availability and variety of the makes and models of ZEVs that you would see with the regulation. So we see that it's not effective in that way. And then also quite worrying is just doing the math on if it's a government handout, $15,000 per vehicle sold, you just multiply those sales by the value, and we're talking billions of dollars over that time frame. So in that long-term scenario, that was a $50+ billion amount of taxpayer money going out. Or if it was made strong enough to actually get to achieve our targets, would have been like a $30,000 or $40,000 per vehicle subsidy. We're talking more than 100 billion. So it's not very attractive from a government expenditure perspective. Now, comparing the regulations with a subsidy-based approach, again, is the regulations, as I've been saying, they also, if they're strong, if they're long-term, they can stimulate innovation in the long run. This first slide here, it's not from our model, it's just an empirical backwards-looking analysis at what happened in California. 1990, California puts in a zero emissions vehicle mandate, and you can see the patent activity, the innovation activity shot up in the ensuing decade after that. And so we've seen this empirical relationship in the past. in our own modeling of Canada, when we simulate this 100% ZEV sales requirement being occurred, we also in our model simulate this rational profit maximizing automakers that as soon as that regulation comes in, they start putting more money into the research and development for electric vehicles, trying to bring down the costs, making it more attractive to consumers so they can comply with the policy requirement and minimize the penalties that they're paying. And it's also can be useful to look at what might happen to the automakers under this. We'll often hear this argument of like, well, if you have huge regulations, it's gonna crush the industry. And here is part of this model is we're simulating as a baseline with the baseline policies what happens with automaker profits over time, which are forecast to be slowly increasing over time with increases in the population and so on. And we see that when we add a strong zero emissions vehicle standard or mandate on top of that, that's the bottom line there, we see that, yeah, it does lead to a leveling off of profits over time, not a decrease. It's actually in 2035, profits are still higher in real terms than today's profits. So it's still an increase. It's just less increase in profits compared to today. So I look at that as more, it's not saying the regulation is going to crush the auto industry. I mean, there's going to be some folks losing money compared to what they would have made otherwise, but it's really that there's going to be a slowdown, which is what you'd expect. I mean, we're talking about shifting an industry to a whole different product. And so those, aside from Tesla, who's already obviously set up for this, the other companies have to do some work to shift things over. So that results in some costs to them, but still profitability overall. The other thing, if you might have noticed from this graph, is that we see those subsidy scenarios I mentioned earlier, where if government's giving out these long-term big subsidies over time, that actually increases profits. And now it has helped me to understand a little better about why the automakers were so interested in that pathway. Is that if all you do, hold everything constant, you add a subsidy in, that's going to lower the average cost of vehicles, induce more sales, which increases automaker profits. But also, as we know in economics, looking at econometric studies, typically if there's an incentive offered, there's some amount of industry capture. There's a rational agency, they set the pricing levels themselves. So if they know there's an incentive out there, they can change their pricing and capture some portion of that. And in this research, we found that automakers were able to capture about 13 to 18% of the value of the subsidy, which still means that more than 80% of it's going towards consumers, which is still inducing sales in that way. So that still works out. But it is something to say that it is, again, taxpayer money kind of being captured by industry in that way is another potential drawback of that strategy that you might want to watch out for. And then there's two last points on the regulation. And the other one is that, as opposed to this government or subsidy capture I just mentioned, when you have a ZEV sales mandate or regulation, one of the things it does is that induces automakers to do their own pricing, as I mentioned, their own what we can call cross-price subsidies, where if they are required to sell electric vehicles, they're going to reduce the profit margins on electric vehicles to try to make those prices lower, and they're going to increase the profit margins on the conventional vehicles to make them more expensive. So there's gonna be some amount of their own kind of fee bait or cross incentive system that they'll be doing. It's hard to actually isolate that. They'll never tell you exactly how they do it in any of their industry reports, but it does occur. And what we simulate that is that's really a major driving force that essentially, if your region has a strong ZEV mandate, that in the long run would lead to lower costs for ZEVs, for electric vehicles in your region, as those automakers try to sell in your region. The last point was just about the availability, and I've already shown this graph, and it's kind of alluded to at the Canada level. And I'll say from a global perspective is that automakers are not usually just thinking domestically. If there's supply constraints, they're looking globally as to where they're going to send their advanced batteries, where they're going to prioritize their sales of zero emissions vehicles, and they're going to do it. They're going to prioritize it in the regions that have these strong regulations. So the EU, that's going to be a target for them now because they've got to comply with these 100% requirements. Same for British Columbia, same for Quebec. So if we're talking about Saskatchewan, even though it falls within what's going to be the national standards, you want to think about what you can do for your province to make it as attractive to automakers to prioritize sales and inventory and availability in your region. So the last slide is just saying, I know that the big question was, what should Saskatchewan do? What should Regina do? I mean, I'm still trying to give you a framework. I'm not giving you, I don't know the perfect answer for your region. I don't want to pretend to, but I would say, definitely consider a policy mix. Consider at least these 4 criteria I've mentioned about effectiveness, efficiency, what's politically acceptable for your region, and what's going to induce that transformation. But then think about within the national context, Canada is putting in this 100% ZEV sales mandate. How can you make Saskatchewan, how can you make Regina attractive to automakers? It's not just for consumers. You want the automakers to get the signal that it's important for them to sell in your region. And I'm saying that, regulation is clearly something that's going to do it. So I don't know if it's Regina should be working with the province to be making sure there is a provincial ZEV sales mandate. I think it was Matt that mentioned a 5% one. I mean, or just a lineup with BC and Quebec to start with, or whatever it takes to get industry's attention, put Saskatchewan on the map, so the vehicles are going to be sent here, they're going to be marketed here, they're going to be made available, the inventory is going to be here to test drive. You want all of that to occur. But also, and I'll add to that, but maybe you want to also have a dialogue about how that policy is set up, about, are there different needs for your province? Maybe it needs, if there's longer distances and the charging infrastructure is growing more slowly, maybe you need more plug-in hybrids as part of that. I'm not sure, but something to look into. The subsidies piece, as I mentioned, subsidies work. Just I'd be careful in designing it, so you're not throwing out too much of the taxpayer dollars, or having these inequity effects as part of it. And if there's political will, even try a fee-based system that's revenue neutral, where you're taxing not the electric vehicles, but taxing the conventional vehicles and using that revenue to subsidize the electric vehicles. And then charging infrastructure has been talked about a lot of it. I would just like to reframe it as that I would say for your province, it's not the huge limiter right now. I wouldn't look at it as you need to get all this charging infrastructure all figured out before you start growing sales. Research has shown that, most of the charging is at home. The majority of new car buyers have garages and single family dwellings. Most of them are multi-car households, so they can figure out, probably the first 20-30% plus of the market can figure out how to integrate electric vehicles. I don't think that's going to hold things up for now. But as we're getting to 100%, once Saskatchewan and the rest of the country is getting to 100% ZEV sales, and that's, we're talking about just over a decade away there. By that point, you want to look ahead and be ready. How are you going to, have the charging infrastructure available for multifamily dwellings, for the apartments, the condos, people who only have street parking? You want to have that lined up so that, it's really the last 20% of buyers that might be struggling a little bit. And so make sure that infrastructure is set up so they're able to use their battery electric vehicles, or to make sure that if they have plug-in hybrids, that they're able to keep them charged most of the time and not relying on gasoline or diesel. So yeah, and all that is saying, there's still lots to learn about consumers, about automakers, and I would say especially, kind of the laggards when we're getting up to the 100% sales numbers. So plenty more to work with that, and also just the specific needs of rural drivers. There hasn't been enough research on that, I'll admit, as well, and I'm happy to do more. But I think, yeah, this can get things going for now, and I'm happy to hear any thoughts or questions. Thank you. I see a question in the, and I don't know who's facilitating here. I see a question in the chat box there.
Sure, I was just about to turn on the mic to say, if you could grab that one first, John, that'd be great. And thank you for your presentation.
Thanks so much. Yeah, low-income families, that's the question, is how about low-income families, and how do they afford the vehicles and the added electric charges? So, yeah, so just, I guess, like, the modeling and such I was showing you is representing new vehicle buyers across all the demographic segments, so of all the different income levels and so on. And so, they're in there, they're in the model to start with. And so one thing we're planning to do moving forward is to do a more focused equity analysis, where we could look specifically at the lower income, mid-income, and high income segments and how they might be impacted differently. Though from what I'm seeing is that it's not so much income that's the big barrier there, because remember, what I'm showing you is that with these regulations in place, the automakers are making the zero emissions vehicles way cheaper, right? They're selling it to voluntarily, the low income households as well as the higher income households, they're voluntarily buying these vehicles. So the regulation is putting it on the automakers to figure out how to make the cheaper, more affordable zero emissions vehicles that are attractive to folks. So the purchase price is something that they can afford, and then the operation costs, of course, are much cheaper overall. So that's one way that all can get addressed. as I'm also admitting that, certainly more research needs to go to make sure it's working just right. So it's low income household, who's in a multifamily dwelling, and there's limited charging infrastructure. We do want to make sure that that's all set up so that it's going to be an easy transition. But I guess what I'm saying here is that it's, this world that we're simulating is where the automakers are having to work with the market to figure out how to meet the needs of lower income households so that they are willingly coming along.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to walk around with the mic now.
Thank you. Hello. So can you speak to some unintended negative impacts of regulatory mandates? For example, what incentive would manufacturers have to keep the costs low when they know that the consumers won't have a choice in the future, right? And so, for example, and then also there is the part where they would reduce the price, at least in the short term, of their combustion engines, right? So that would increase the sales of combustion engines in the next 5 to 10 years because they want to clear that inventory, and people, particularly low income households, would be forced to again buy combustion engines just because that's more affordable at the moment.
Thanks for those questions. And can I confirm that everyone heard that question, right? That was projected through the audience there?
Yeah, that was projected, so everybody heard that. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah. So and so sorry, I realize I went through a lot of things fast here. So I think some of the answers to that are really just a clarification or potential miscommunication on my part. So to be clear, a zero emissions vehicle sales mandate, as has been originated in California in 1990 and other ZEV states, as is in place in British Columbia, as in place in Quebec, versions in China, and now being designed in Canada. All of them are the same in that they are put on the automaker. They don't require people to do anything. It's not stopping what people can do. Individual car buyers buy whatever they want. It's the automakers that need to comply with this regulation, and they are the ones that pay a penalty for non-compliance. So I hope this addresses, you can see how this addresses your question, is saying that, well, it's no, it's not that automakers know that consumers have to buy their car. That's not at all. I see your point. If that was working that way, that would not work. No. It is automakers saying, oh, shoot, we better figure out how to sell these cars. We better make good cars, market them well, these zero emissions vehicles, market them well and price them well so that these voluntary, rational, or whatever, people are coming and buying these vehicles. So it does the opposite of what you're saying. It puts a huge incentive on the automakers to make, market, and sell these vehicles in your jurisdiction if you have that regulation. Somewhat related, I mean, you mentioned the idea that, is there a short-term negative impact? You said maybe for 5 to 10 years, there might be some reason for automakers to be selling conventional vehicles. There can be a little bit of a transition issue, but not at all, not 5 or 10 years. This policy we're talking about is every year it ramps up the requirement for the percentage of sales that have to be zero emissions vehicles. This is how it's set up in Quebec, British Columbia, going to be in the country. So every year the automakers have to sell more and more electric vehicles. So they're planning, they plan 3-4 years ahead for their assembly line. So they wouldn't have a bunch of extra conventional vehicles in 10 years if this policy was in place, right? They would be planning that out ahead of time. So I've never seen anyone, uncover this potential, flooding of the market in the long term of conventional vehicles. This wouldn't be building them. It wouldn't really make sense that way. But I guess on the negative side is, it can be, it could be that if the regulation starts next year, then this year they sell more conventional vehicles. So there can be like a really, really short-term negative impact, possibly. Or put it another way, it could be that if the regulation is starting soon, then more people buy conventional vehicles this year, and they buy fewer new vehicles in the next couple of years. So you do see a potential few years where the policy lags behind what it wants to be, but even accounting for all of that, those are like minor, a few percentage points on your overall goal kind of thing. Whereas, after 5-10 years, like you would be getting towards that zero emissions vehicle dominating the market scenario.
Okay, really good. Thank you. Other questions for John? Okay, 1 second here.
Oh, hi, Dr. Exon. So what do you think of the $150 EV tax that's imposed by the Saskatchewan government? Do you think it's necessary to do it?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I probably could have said more to it. It sounded like it had been talked about a fair bit in this workshop, but short answer is no, it's going against the goals. It doesn't make any sense. It can make sense from a very limited perspective of, especially EVs aren't paying gasoline tax, they aren't contributing to infrastructure and so on, so get that tax out of them that way. But take the bigger picture perspective is that, what I started with, societally, we need to get dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gas emissions are this environmental negative externality, and economists, other stakeholders, like policymakers would agree. We need to do something to reward and to reward the good behavior, disincentivize the bad behavior. And so it's so clear now electric vehicles are a key part to us getting on that trajectory towards the net zero for light duty vehicles, that it is a social good. We need to do everything we can to support the electric vehicles for all the social benefits, for avoided climate change impacts, for avoided air pollution, and so on, that it would make sense. You would want to channel, the incentives into electric vehicles. It seems very short-sighted and unfortunate to instead just put a tax that's just on the electric vehicle. That's totally going against your own goals.
Wow, that's pretty definitive. Thank you. Okay, I think we will close it down because we have pizza waiting for us.